Okay. Hopefully this records.
It's recording. You're good.
Okay. I guess it's recording. Perfect. And I will share my screen. So welcome again, everybody. I appreciate the time that you're giving us here. We're pretty much right on time. I like to wait for everybody to get in. We've got a big group today. So again, welcome. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is week one, as we discussed earlier. A little bit about me. These are, I have 2 kids, I'm married, and I have 3 dogs right now. I had a lot of Malinois over the years. I've since adjusted my lifestyle to having labs. I love labs. They're just so easy. Big fan. So I have 3 labs right now: Dax, Schooner, and Peanut. Yeah, I'm a working dog guy. That's kind of how I got into all this kind of stuff. Do a lot of retriever training, stuff like that. Used to do a ton of scent detection, personal protection, that kind of thing, which is kind of how I really got into aggression in a lot of ways. But that's just a little bit about me. You don't need to know that much about me. If you have more questions, do let me know. But I am very consumed with reactive and aggressive dogs. I love working with them. I don't know exactly why, but I love it. Every day is a new day. It's great. I will leave it at that. So that's kind of my spiel. Moving on to the next one. So we talked a little bit about, just put your questions in the chat box. So the first thing I wanted to go through, and this is something that might seem kind of ridiculous, but I really like to talk about learning theory, dog training theory, just very basically, especially to my clients. I understand that a lot of you guys and gals are going to have a lot better understanding of learning theory, as do I. However, I leave that at the door when I'm working with clients, because the average client, in my estimation, doesn't really need to know or understand like really in-depth things. I personally don't believe they need to understand the difference between operant conditioning, classical conditioning, desensitization, counter conditioning, etc. You can work with the average client, get them to completely change their dog without having them understand those things. And I feel as though learning theory to the large degree is something that dog trainers do for themselves, and it's less about the person. Because let's be honest, when was the last time you had a client that really understood theory, that was just a great client because they really understood theory? I feel as though in many ways it's a stumbling block for most people. And my whole ethos is I want to how do I put this? I want to say the least amount possible with my clients and still get them to where they need to go, so that I don't confuse them. Okay, so I want to make first principles first, only focus on things that are really, really important. So here's how I explain dog training theory in, let's say, 60 seconds or less. The way I deem it is basically this. All living creatures do things for one of 2 reasons. They're seeking a positive outcome, or they're avoiding a negative outcome. Okay. In dog training, because I'm a balanced trainer, you may have different ideas on how to go about training a dog. In that, we will use things like food, toys, praise, treats in order to incentivize our dog to do the things that we want them to be doing. Okay. And it will make it more likely that our dog does something we want them to do. And at the same time, it will usually increase the speed. Why a lot of people come into me is not because they suck at being a good cheerleader for their dog. It's usually because they're really good at being a cheerleader for their dog. However, they've plateaued in their training. which just means there's certain things that they're not able to get to break through. Usually that's leash reactivity, the recall's not the greatest, maybe some aggression issues, etc. So you're incentivizing on the positive side, and on the negative side, corrections, or I'm not going to go into all the science, but let's just call them corrections for layman's terms. They will do the opposite of what the positive does. So they will decrease the likelihood of seeing behaviors that you don't want to be seeing. So basically, that's it. That's all the theory that I go through with my clients. I talk to them about that in the evaluation when I'm meeting them. And then when I start a first lesson with the client, it's literally that was actually a longer version than I normally would do, but it's about 30 seconds. Okay, let's get right into our training. We start going through our e-collar, and we can talk about a training syllabus and that kind of stuff if you want later on. There are resources on the website. You can kind of see what we go through. But basically, I get right into it because I don't want to be a stumbling block for my clients. I want them to start getting to use the tools, starting to get repetitions in, and that kind of stuff. And so this is something that's very key that I've taught many, many, many hundreds of dog trainers to change in their process. And I will guarantee you that your life will be a lot easier if you're spending a half an hour to an hour going through theory after theory after theory. Your clients will not get worse. Okay, the less theory I do with clients, the better my clients get, because they can focus on things that actually move the needle. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, post them in the comment section below, but hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay. Okay, so my two-step process to rehabilitation is simple in, let's say, it's simple to communicate. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's simple to implement. So what that means is the first step is make the dog safe. The second step is make the process look good, or make the dog look good. Okay, so what this means is I am very frustrated with dog trainers that are so incredibly focused on having an aggressive dog look like he's having fun, when to me, that is probably going to lead to A, somebody being bitten, or B, a dog getting attacked, or just whatever, something bad happening, because the client is so focused on the dog looking, incredibly enthusiastic. Whereas for me, I don't care so much about that. Okay. Let's be honest. Not every dog is going to like the training. You could be a positive reinforcement only trainer, and you're still going to have some dogs that don't like the process all that much. And you're not even using any pressure on the dogs. And so in that, I would rather make the dog safe, and then I'll worry about what it looks good. I sum it up by saying this to fellow trainers. I don't care what a dog looks like, or I'm not going to do socialization with a dog. I'm not going to put him around my other dogs if he's still got a hair trigger, or if he's doing a little bit better, but if a dog looks at him in the eyes, he's going to lose his mind and he's going to try to attack that dog. I don't care if the dog is not safe, because I'm not safe, the clients aren't safe, their dog is not safe, my dogs are not safe. Nobody is safe if the dog has not been made to be safe. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about safety, but just know that I kind of have a shift in my process where it's okay, make this dog reliable, make him safe, get him to question making bad decisions. And then we can worry about bringing that dog up, making that dog really, look really good and enthusiastic. But for me, the making the dog safe period usually takes 2 to 4 weeks maximum. And then from there, then I might take a couple of months in group classes to really make that dog look good, right? Really enthusiastic, etc. Okay, moving on to our next point. And if you have more questions about that, post them in the comments or the chat box. I do not do board and trains. You can watch the masterclass that I've included for everybody. So again, log into mangodogs.com/courses and you can watch that. So the whole idea is, and by the way, I did add it for everybody, so everybody can watch it. So I know somebody paid a little bit extra for it. I appreciate it, but I did want everybody to watch it. So you can go back and watch that if you want to. I'm not going to go through this extensively, but having said that, I do not do board and trains because I fundamentally hate doing board and trains. That's why I hate them. Okay. I do not like doing them.
That's an understatement.
That is, loathe is probably a more accurate word. Okay. I used to get so stressed out doing board and trains. And I'm very lucky. I have a huge property. I have a facility on my property. It's completely separated from my house, my wife, my kids, all this kind of stuff. And every morning I would wake up and I'd go to get those dogs out of their kennels, and I'd be walking up the stairs, and my heart would just be racing. Is the dog okay? Even though I've been watching over a camera and all this kind of stuff, I was so stressed out by it. Okay. I actually had a dog get away from me one time, a really, really sketchy pit bull a long time ago. It was like traumatizing to me. You know, the dog was fine. They found the dog. It was not a big deal, but it stressed me out so much. So I'm not going to tell you not to do board and trains, but there are a lot of dog trainers that come to me specifically to learn how I work with aggressive dogs without a board and train, because it seems to be something, let's say, kind of dog trainers sometimes assume that you have to do aggressive dogs in a board and train. Because I loathe board and trains as much as I do, I have literally just developed a way like to work with every single dog without a board and train. Yeah, it can be tricky sometimes, don't get me wrong, but there's also benefits to it, right? Like there's never a question in my mind. I never, ever have the ability to do something to a dog because the client is not there. So there's never a question of, like, what did he do behind closed doors? I'm not that kind of a guy, but nobody can ever question me on that, because every single second that I'm with that dog, the owners are right there. Okay. It's also great because obviously I don't have to be stressed out. I can travel more. Yay, COVID. Not like I travel anymore, but I used to be able to travel more because I didn't have, a bunch of dogs, in my facility and that kind of stuff. So anyways, you do not have to do board and trains if you do not want to. And I'm going to show you kind of the process that I do in during our call today. So I mentioned obviously doing private lessons. I'm very lucky where I have a facility on my property, so people come to me, but this process can be done when you go to clients if you don't have a facility. I worked on the road for many, many years. So if you don't feel left out. It's not like, this is a specific thing where you have to have a facility or anything like that. I typically do 4 private lessons, 1 per week for 4 weeks. And then I do group classes after that. You can watch some of Maya's videos on the website. I posted the before and after video. I think the first lesson and the second lesson. I think we have I might have posted the third lesson too. I can't remember. I think we just had her in a couple of days ago. But I'll post the 4th lesson when they come in. I think they're coming in later this week. And then also I'll probably do a video at group class. So there should be like 5, 6 videos total. So you can see kind of how it goes. I know she's not the most aggressive dog in the world, but I didn't want to choose a man eater because a lot of you guys are not at that stage. So I wanted to show it like an easier dog that anybody can start with. Honestly, I could train Maya in my sleep. She's that easy. Okay. It's still a big deal for the client. Just because it's easy for me, it doesn't mean it's not a big deal for the client. She was seriously considering rehoming her dog. And, that's just ridiculous for, the ease that this dog is. So we'll talk more about my private lessons and group classes and stuff as we go on. I'm sure you guys will have more questions on that, but there's a training syllabus on the course. I've posted a lot of stuff in this course, guys, so please use it if you're interested. Why do dogs bite? Well, there's 2 reasons. They can and they think they have to. Okay, that's the plain and the simple. I try to speak in simple terms when it can be communicated in a simple fashion. There are some things that are not simple, but most things can be boiled down to simple fundamentals. They bite because they can. So that's the dog choosing to bite, and they bite because they think they have to. I have been watching a TV show called Pit Bulls and Parolees, if any of you guys have watched that show before. And the main character on that talks a lot about how all aggression is fear-based and all this kind of stuff. And I just roll my eyes the entire episode. It's ridiculous. But only to say that that is not the only reason why dogs bite. That is not the only reason why dogs are aggressive towards other dogs, etc. Like, how do you explain predatory aggression, right? Like, I'm going to go into this a little bit more, but just for, for the simplicity of it, they bite because they can. and they think they have to. And this may be something that's helpful for you to get your clients to understand. I would suggest, and I know this is taboo, guys, gals, others, I don't want to be specific. I know people have different pronouns and all that kind of stuff. Anybody who's on this call, I would suggest that the vast majority of dogs that I work with are not biting people or attacking other dogs because they think they have to, which would be AKA fear. The vast majority, I actually should go back and look through my evaluations because I have been going back for over a decade. I would suggest that at least 85 to 90% of my clients are biting because they can't. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, the difference between fear or defensive aggression and defensive aggression and offensive aggression, but that's just a little bit of a spoiler alert. So the difference between reactivity and aggression, this is something that people often ask me, is that reactivity looks like aggression. So it's barking, growling, lunging, etc. We usually see it with dogs that are reactive on a leash. Aggression we usually see with dogs that are off leash because they have the ability to make a decision. Most leash reactivity is based out of frustration. We'll talk a lot about this when we get to those types of modules, especially in the leash reactivity stuff, obviously. And then there's dogs that can redirect, all kinds of different stuff. We'll be talking about this stuff kind of at length. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about, if you're a little bit newer into working with reactivity and aggression, like how I would typically suggest a newer trainer get started. And you're going to fall somewhere on the spectrum between 1 to 7 as far as which dogs that you would be able to take. The newer people are going to be in the 1s, 2s, 3s, maybe. The people who are a little bit more moderate are going to be able to go a little bit further, and then the people who are a little bit more advanced are going to kind of go all the way if they want to, of course. But I like to start with the most simplistic stuff. We are starting to do some franchising. We have multiple trainers, all this kind of stuff, and so I like to start them out. Okay, like start with basic dog training, off leash control, all these different things, and then you can start working with some leash reactivity. Leash reactivity towards other dogs is relatively simple in most cases. Dogs that bark at people, that kind of stuff is relatively simple in most cases. Starting out with that is definitely the easiest thing to do. It just because it tends to be the safest thing. As long as the owner doesn't drop the leash, no harm, no foul. You don't have to worry about things, and you're good to go. It's usually pretty streamlined. If you're anxious about getting into working with dogs like this, start with these dogs. And there's tons of them out there. Like, tons of our clients come in with leash reactivity. When you want to start moving things a little bit forward, then you can start going into some dog aggression stuff if you want to start challenging things a little bit. And this is a little bit more intricate if you actually want to do socialization and things like that. We'll talk about when to do socialization and a little bit about a little bit further into that, and why I don't really socialize a lot of my clients' dogs. This is something that has changed dramatically over the years, but I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this. If you have comments or questions, feel free to post them in the chat box about which dogs I actually socialize and which dogs I kind of light social. Morgan is in the waiting room, by the way, Sarah, thanks. And then moving on maybe to dogs who redirect. Dogs, so if you're not familiar with this, dogs who redirect just means, oh, sorry, I gotta go back. I didn't mention the difference between reactivity and aggression, which is reactivity looks a lot like aggression, barking, growling, lunging, etc. But in most cases, those dogs don't actually have desire to hurt other dogs, other people, whatever. They're in large part, they're frustrated. An aggressive dog is a dog that has intention to hurt another creature, okay? And it can be a little bit difficult, but we will talk about this to understand the difference between a dog that is leash reactive, who gets into fights. Doesn't necessarily mean that dog is aggressive, because some dogs present themselves very inappropriately, but we'll talk about that later on. So again, leash reactivity, barking, growling, lunging, etc. Aggression is just like, okay, this dog really wants to bite somebody. This dog really wants to attack somebody. And it's pretty easy to tell, right? It's like, this dog is like mangling other dogs at the park, yeah, he's aggressive. If this dog is biting other people, yeah, he's aggressive. So we'll talk more about that later on. So dogs who redirect would be dogs that would basically be walking on a leash. Most dogs that redirect, I'm going to talk about on a leash. Basically, they're walking, they get frustrated, they may see another dog across the street, etc., and they get really excited, and they can redirect on the person. So either the trainer or the owner, whoever's holding the leash. Typically, it's the person that's closest to the dog. And then if that doesn't happen, they can, if sometimes we'll see dogs who are in multiple dog homes, so they have 1, 2, 3 dogs, and the dog will redirect on one of the other dogs. This is, again, typically a frustration piece. And so, you know, starting with dogs that redirect, we'll be talking about more of this later on, by the way, everybody, when we talk about leash reactivity. But, you know, moving into those types of dogs, you got to be better at reading dogs. You got to be have your timing a little bit better, and so on. So maybe you move into that when you're, you know, you got a little bit more under your belt. Moving into human aggressive dogs towards strangers. This is a lot easier than dealing with dogs that are aggressive towards their owners, which we'll talk about in number 6. But a lot of the dogs that come in are human aggressive towards strangers, really sketchy when people come to the house, territorial around the yard, etc. Again, when you're starting to learn some more, you could feel like you can read dogs better. You want to take on a little bit more. This is a good opportunity to start building into that. Dogs fighting in the same house. This is very, very difficult. Number 5, 6, and 7 are very challenging. I would not suggest touching 5, 6, or 7 unless you are very good at reading dogs. You really know what you're doing and worked with a lot of reactive dogs, a lot of aggressive dogs, and that kind of stuff, because a lot can go wrong here. So there is kind of a throughput between number 5, 6, and 7. Okay, and here is the thing that is the same between 5, 6, and 7. Okay, I don't know if any of you guys can guess it, but here's basically the thing that they have in common. Dogs that are fighting in the house, human aggressive dogs towards their owners, and child aggressive dogs. I'm speaking more as in child aggressive dogs and the dog lives with a child. So those 3 cases, the reason that they're as difficult as they are is all the other situations 1 through 4 are situations where if the client doesn't have to be super vigilant at every moment in time, okay? Because if the dog is leash reactive, okay, so they go for 2 walks a day, 20 minutes a day, you know, they have to be on point, they have to be diligent for 40 minutes a day. That's easy for anybody to do, right? If the dog is dog aggressive, okay, don't let your dog run out in the yard, set up a baby gate so the dog's not running out, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's not that difficult to prevent a dog fight from happening, okay? There's lots of systems and procedures that you can do. You know, dogs that redirect, again, 2 walks a day, be hyper vigilant, follow the process, and nobody's going to get hurt, okay? Same thing with human aggression towards strangers. Well, you don't have people come over, you know, every 10 minutes in your house. Most of my clients have somebody that comes over, you know, especially with COVID, it's like they might not have anybody come over their house for like several days or a week, right? Maybe even longer than that. So as long as they're on point when people come over and they do the right things, nothing bad is going to happen. But 5, 6, and 7, the dogs are living together 24/7, which means the people have to be on point 24/7, right? Human aggression towards owners. Okay, they take the dog out for a walk. They got to be diligent. The dog gets into the mud. They come home. They want to wipe the dog's feet off. They got to be vigilant, right? They got to give the dog, they got to clean the dog's ears. They got to clip the dog's nails. They got to do, you know, they're going to be doing everything with their dog. So they have to be super vigilant, and you really need to get people on board to understand, listen, this is a lot of work, okay? And it's not something you can do for a month and then you're done. Child aggressive cases, like, I don't have to go into this in detail. I don't think you have to be a parent to understand how important this is. But it's very rare that I take on these cases. I've done a bunch of them in the past. God forbid, fingers crossed, I've never had a case where something bad happened. But I'm super like, let's just say my prices are like $10,000 to $15,000 for these cases. I don't want people to sign up. Okay, let's put it that way. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide. There's different types of aggression, and again, this is terminology that I talk about. Okay, this is stuff that I talk about. Everybody has different things. People have different bite scales as far as like how bad the bite is, and they give it a number from 0 to 7 or 0 to 10 or whatever. This is just how I talk about it, right? Everybody has their own terminology. But basically, there's different types. The first one being fear or defensive. Again, very misdiagnosed in most cases, because let's be realistic, the vast majority of dogs, given the opportunity or given the freedom, do not have to bite people. So the majority of people that come in that have human aggressive dogs, for example, or even dog aggressive dogs for that matter, the majority of them believe that their dog is fear aggressive. Okay. A lot of times it's because they went to another trainer and they said, oh, your dog is fear aggressive and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes it's they read stuff on the internet, blah, 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 all these different things. But in most cases, that is not accurate. And here's how I determine whether the dog is fear aggressive or defensive aggressive, or if the dog is offensive aggressive, which we'll talk about later on, which is more common. So dogs that I deem to be fear or defensive are dogs who bite people or attack other dogs because there's absolutely no other way for them to avoid conflict. I see fear aggression as the avoidance of conflict. Okay, so unless you have a client who has a friend who comes into their house and somehow corrals the dog into the corner of the kitchen and is poking and prodding at it, and that dog is trying to get away, and he growls and he tries to avoid conflict, and then he bites somebody, that dog is not fear aggressive. The vast majority of dogs that come in and the clients are so convinced that their dog is fear aggressive, when I ask them, tell me about the last 3 times your dog bit somebody, the vast majority of the time, the dog ran to the door, the owner opened the door, the dog was already barking, the person was at the door, and then the dog didn't growl, didn't do anything, just ran out onto the front step and bit the person. The dog did not have to be aggressive towards that person. He had the whole hallway. He could have run into another room. He could have avoided conflict if he wanted to. He never had to be at the door. He was not on a leash in most of these cases. He did not have to bite that person, right? Or you've got a dog who's at the park and apparently he's fear aggressive, and yet he's just playing around doing his own thing. A dog shows up, he runs over to the dog and starts a fight. And for some reason, this is somehow a fear response. Absolute bull crap 80 to 90% of the time, okay? Unless the dog is being forced, it is not defensively aggressive, okay? There are some dogs that are in a position like this. Their owner forces them to go to the dog park. Other dogs, push them and push them and push them. They're humping, whatever, acting aggressively towards them. They try to get away from the other dogs. Nothing is working. And so they tackle the dog, etc. With fear cases, typically when a dog is fearful and bites a human, typically it is a quick snap and a retreat. Okay, you don't see fear aggressive dogs biting and people needing stitches or going to the hospital, or dogs needing to go to the vet and getting a bunch of stitches, etc. Okay, so with offensive aggression, which is most of what I see, okay, you're going to see dominance-based aggression, which I'm not one of these big dominance guys. I very rarely talk about it because I think that dominance is extremely rare. In my career, I've evaluated probably 4,000 or 5,000 reactive and aggressive dogs, and I might have seen it 10 times. So it's like uber rare, okay? And usually it's in the northern breeds like wolf hybrids and sometimes with some Malamutes and stuff like that. Predatory aggression. So we'll talk more about this, especially when we get to like I think the dog aggression, we'll talk more about that. Familial aggression and neurological aggression. Sorry, there should be a comma in between neurological and familial. I'm super dyslexic, so you'll see a bunch of typos and stuff like that. Sorry about that in advance. But neurological aggression, we're going to be talking about that at some point. And familial aggression, which is basically parents and I'm blanking on the word. I want to say children, but parents and offspring, I believe would be the right term. So a mother who is aggressive towards its a female or male puppy. Usually when it's parents, it's almost always, if it's female, it's usually towards the female puppies. If it's like a male dog as the sire, it's usually towards the male counterparts. And then you can also get it within siblings too, right? So you can get it usually, again, it's like same sex kind of a situation. Okay, so we'll talk more about these things later on, but in most cases, again, it's the dog choosing to do this, right? It's like, hey, I want to go attack this dog. Like we get dogs in all the time where it's like the client opens the door, they've got a bunch of groceries, they bring them inside of the house, and the dog runs out of the door, he runs across the street and attacks another dog. Like, no, that's not fair. Like, come on, like this is basic stuff here, guys. So hopefully that makes sense. There's different types of reactivity. Most of it is frustration, 95% of the time, I would suggest. And then some people believe that there's like fear-based reactivity because a dog could have been attacked by another dog, and in so doing, they become reactive, and so on and so forth. We'll talk more about that when we talk about leash reactivity. There's also lots of dogs that get attacked that actually enjoy the act of fighting. So it's not always a fearful thing. I know that was heresy what I just said. Just because a dog was attacked by another dog, it does not mean that it's fearful towards other dogs. There are dogs that like the act of fighting because it's very high arousal. So there are some cases that are like that. It's not very common, but there are some cases which we talked about before. And then a common question that I get often is fear also aggression? Is it, I think that doesn't make sense. Is fear also aggression, really aggression? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But oftentimes I hear people ask, like, is fear aggression still aggression? Well, yeah, if we use the terminology of aggression is the dog wanting to hurt another living creature, then technically it is. But it's kind of a caveat because it's like most fear cases, they're not really trying to hurt, they're just trying to defend themselves. So that's kind of a moot area. It's kind of in between. It doesn't really matter, right? Like you can answer it either way, and really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Okay. It is important to understand whether a dog is fearful and reacting or aggressing because of that, or if a dog is one of the more offensive, aggressive dogs, like dominance-based, predatory, that kind of stuff. And the reason for that is because you're going to work with a dog that is fearful differently than working with a dog that has got the offensive aggression. So I'll talk about this more in later weeks, but really it comes down to, in most cases, fearful dogs need to develop confidence and need to develop trust that has been, let's say, taken away in certain situations between the owner and the dog. That's something that needs to be repaired. We'll talk about that later at some point. And in the more offensive cases, the dog needs to learn that that behavior is not going to be allowed anymore. Plain and simple. So we'll talk about that more later on, but it is what it is. So at the bottom, it says, know when to advocate for dogs and when to correct them. Again, trying to put things in simple terms. Okay, let's see. Looks like my slide is not working. Just give me 1 sec.
Looks like you went into edit because there's like some red mark on your. So I don't know if you're in the edit format.
Okay,
there you go. There you go.
Just froze. Okay, thank you very much.
There you go.
Okay, so oh, we already went through this one. Okay, safety slide. Okay, so Many of the following tips do not apply to aggressive dogs. They should apply to all dogs. Okay, so don't make the mistake of assuming that like I only have to do this stuff with aggressive dogs, because I know thousands of dog trainers and the vast majority of them are bitten by dogs that are not aggressive. So it's good to keep your guard up when you're around aggressive dogs, but you will probably be bitten by dogs that are not, known as aggressive dogs. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Okay, I treat every dog that comes in like it's going to bite me. We'll talk about that here as we go along. Okay, always assume that every dog is going to try to bite you, no exceptions. So this is the first thing that I teach people that come to shadow, or people, I'm not doing shadows anymore, by the way, people that used to shadow, our other locations, our staff members, etc. So just keep that in mind. Assume that every dog will try to bite you. Lots of times it won't happen and you will be prepared. But the time that it does happen, again, you will be prepared. You can't be too prepared when it comes down to this, okay? There's so many times I get emails from trainers. They send me pictures of them, their arms being bit up and all this kind of stuff. And the vast majority of the time, it's like, I should have known better. I just didn't take things seriously enough, yada, 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 yada. Okay, just assume that they're going to try to bite you, okay? Even if it's not an aggressive dog, even if you're doing like just a basic obedience program, whatever, still approach, right? I'm watching for all kinds of different things. Is the person holding on to the leash, soundly? Do they have a good grasp on it? Oftentimes I'll look at their leash, like, is it a good quality leash? Or does it have chew marks through it? I'm sure you guys have seen, people come in, their leash is like, it's like only half connected because the dog's been chewing through it. If I see that right away, I'm like throwing a new leash on the dog. I'm going to get the client to do it. We'll talk about all these different things. Okay. So assume if you take anything away from this program, this can save you from being bitten. I was bitten one time in my entire career. It was by a basset hound of all dogs. Of course, it was during a board and train. So I guess another reason why I hate board and trains. But it was a long time ago, and I learned, I got comfortable with that dog. The dog had a bite history, pretty extensive, resource guarding, all this kind of stuff. I let my guard down for a second with him. He wasn't there yet, and I got bit. It was pretty bad. It could have been worse, but it was pretty bad. And I learned my lesson. Do not let your guard down around these dogs. Just because the dog's been good for the last 2 weeks, it doesn't mean he's not going to try to bite you. I learned my lesson in that one bite. I hope to not ever have to be bitten again. And remember, I work with reactive and aggressive dogs every day. Okay, so you don't have to be bitten. Like sometimes I hear these trainers, it's usually men. I'm not trying to crap on men or anything like that, but it's usually men, and they're like, look at my hands, I've been bitten so many times, I'm so serious, I work with aggressive dogs, whatever. Like, I don't want to judge anybody right now, but that to me does not indicate that you're a good dog trainer who works with aggressive dogs. That indicates that you're a sloppy dog trainer that is doing some really dangerous stuff. Okay. And I always say, if I can't replicate it with my client, I shouldn't be doing it. Everything that I do, my clients have to replicate. So bear that in mind. So be careful. Ask potential clients if their dog has ever bitten anybody for any reason, and look at them in the eye. This is something I've actually been forgetting to do recently, but I used to be super diligent about it. If I've got a dog that comes in, regardless whether it's social, human aggressive, dog aggressive, anything, you ask them, look at them in the eyes. Okay. Like, they have to fill out this big form just to come in to meet with me, but and they have to answer this question. But when you ask them, look at them in the eyes. Has your dog ever bitten anybody for any reason, like any reason whatsoever? And look at them in the eyes. If they do this, no, charge them an extra $5,000. Okay. Pro tip. Okay. All right. Tyler liked that one. I could see Tyler on the camera. Okay. Pro tip. Charge them an extra $5,000 because they just lied to you. Okay. The amount of times I've had people come in and again, this is very often a man thing. I hate to be crapping on men because I am a man. I'm very pro man. But it is almost always with men where the man will just be like, no. And then the man, if they're there with a spouse, let's say it's a woman, the woman will kind of nudge, honey, but what about so and what about this? It's usually the man will say no because he's justified in his mind that it wasn't a bite because he approached the dog to get a bone from it and the dog bit him. Okay, so he doesn't believe that it was a bite because he thinks that it was his fault. So he will not mention it. Okay, I don't think I've ever seen a woman do this. I've only seen men. Obviously, all shapes and sizes can act this way, I'm sure. But specifically, you want to ask it with men. You might even, if you have a couple there, let's say there's a man and a woman in front of you, you might want to ask them specifically, right? Has your dog, right? And then move on to the next person, right? And a lot of times you'll get stuff like people being really authentic, like, yeah, he kind of nips a little bit when we're playing and whatever. Like, does that count? Okay, thank you for telling me that. Yeah, like, no, it's not something that I'm all that worried about, but thank you for letting me know that stuff, right? So you want to get as much information as you can. The amount of people that have lied to me because I didn't push enough, like, there's a lot of people that have lied. Okay, and sometimes it's knowing, and sometimes it's just like they just don't think that that's really something that they should mention. Okay, so this alone could save you from being bitten. Okay, let me tell you a real quick story. One time I was working with a German Shepherd. There was a nice lady that brought in the dog, and I went. It was the first lesson. She told me that the dog was great, with all people and all this kind of stuff, and the dog looked fine. And so I went to go put an e-collar on the dog. And most of the stories I'm going to tell you are stories that happened a long time ago, okay? Because I've learned from all these mistakes. So long story short, I go to put an e-collar on the dog first to get started. And I'm like just about to like cinch it down. And the dog totally lights up on me. And I was able to back up, and thankfully I didn't get bitten. But I was like, whoa, like what the hell? And she looks at me and she's like, well, maybe she thought you were like a vet or something, because she tries to eat the vet every time we go in there. Like 2 seconds ago, oh, he's great with everybody, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And it just really instilled in me two things. One, get the clients to put the tool on. I don't do that anymore. I'm like, here, you do it. Like, I'm not doing it. Even if the dog is happy and social, 90% of the time, I won't do it, right? You do it. If they can't even put an e-collar on their own dog, they're paying me an insane amount of money. I'll just tell you that right now, because I had a Mastiff a couple of months ago that the dog like literally tried to like eat his owner for coming to try to put a collar on him. Let's just say they didn't sign up because they would have had to remortgage their house and sell their car. Okay, like 200-pound dog, and you can't even put a collar on him without him trying to eat you. That's very serious. So most clients can put a collar on their dog. If they can't, honestly, you just quote them higher. Just go like, listen, if you can't even put a collar on your own dog, like, we got to strip this way back. Okay, that's a huge, huge red flag if your dog is that messed up. Okay, all right. So again, ask them. Very important. If you're not doing this, please do it. It will save you potentially from being bitten at some point. Using muzzles is to keep you safe. It's also to help keep other dogs safe. And in reality, it's also helpful for the owner. That's why I know a lot of dog trainers use them, because it is helpful for the owner to calm down and to be a little bit more comfortable. I am not the kind of person that would ever suggest not using a muzzle. I'm just saying that I very rarely use muzzles. I can't remember the last time I used a muzzle. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago. I just have a bad memory. But I don't use them for a couple of different reasons. Mainly, I very rarely will use them. And when I say don't, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't, okay? It just means that I don't typically. but I'm not against it. And at some point I will use a muzzle on a dog if I need to. I don't use them because they tend to change the dog's behavior so much that it's very difficult. But I do not suggest that if you are new to training, or even you've been training for like 5, 6, 7 years, you might still be better with using a muzzle based on like if your dog reading skills are not as good as mine, like you're going to want to use muzzles, right? You know, or if you've got a client that, you know, the dog lives with a kid and the dog is aggressive towards the kid, like hell, like use a muzzle. There's no reason you guys should not be using muzzles. It makes you feel better. If you feel that you're safer, maybe you're starting your first dog that redirects on the leash and you go, hey, yeah, that'd be great to have a muzzle on here, right? Don't think that because I very rarely use them that like I somehow would judge you for. I used muzzles a lot in the beginning for many, many years. I've just gotten to a point where I'm capable enough of reading dogs where I can typically see if a dog is going to react 20 to 30 seconds before the dog reacts. Okay. So if you're not there, don't feel ashamed. You know, don't worry about that. Use muzzles. When muzzling, again, another typo, use Baskervilles, Jeffcos, or Bumas. So I got a couple of muzzles here. This is very similar to the Baskervilles. This is one I think that was similar from Amazon actually. But Baskervilles you can get at most pet stores. So I usually tell my clients to just go to a pet store and if they want to do a muzzle. And get the Baskervilles are good. There is a challenge to them. If the dog is human aggressive, I do not suggest this style. The reason for it is because there's a lot of areas where you can get fingers and noses. I know some people laugh at me and they're like, oh, Ted, you're an idiot. Like somebody's going to get their finger bitten. Like, ah, ha, ha, all this kind of stuff. Ask me how I arrived at not using these muzzles for human aggressive dogs. One of my clients worked at a pet store. She didn't want to spend the $70 or whatever it is for a Jeffco. She said, no, I can get one for free at my pet store or whatever. She had a super aggressive pit bull and she was trying to cut his nails and the dog almost bit her pinky completely off. She had to have it surgically put back together because she wanted to save $70. After that, I just said, hey, your dog's human aggressive. They're getting a Jeffco or you're going to have to buy one. I usually just, you know, if the dog's that bad, I'll just get them to buy one online. I don't really keep them in stock. I'll get them to buy one online before they even come in. So for dog aggression, I'm okay with it. You know, maybe a dog could get a tip of a tail through there or something like that. But for human aggression, especially serious cases, not a huge fan. Maybe for a dog that redirects on leash, I'd be comfortable with something like that. But a dog that's going to try to, you know, really rip into somebody, I'm just not comfortable with stuff like this. That's just me. Okay. That's just me. You know, do whatever you want. It's your safety at the end of the day. This is a muzzle from Jeffco. They're not super easy to get, but I know Learberg used to sell them. You can get them direct from Jeffco, I believe. Jafco. If you're gonna buy one, always buy the clear plastic. It is a moldable plastic, which just means it's not a hard plastic. They have a white plastic and a black plastic ones, and they're really hard. And if you get muzzle punched with one of those, it hurts. I've had like huge welts on my body from dogs hitting me really hard with a Jeffco. And so I prefer the clear plastic ones. You can also cut holes in the front here just to, you know, to be able to do food if you want to do food in there. But this is going to be a little bit safer. So get the clear plastic. And I always suggest get the one with the top strap. So the third strap is an extra $5. I highly suggest it. If you don't need it, if you've got a shepherd with a really long nose and they can't get it off, they don't need the top strap, you can just cut it off. It's no big deal. But for the extra $5, spring for it. It's really helpful to, you know, help to keep it on the dog. So that's just a little bit about muzzles. When I put a muzzle on, I do not condition muzzles. Again, I don't really use them very often, but I do not. I know this is kind of heresy. People will say, oh, like, no, you should do, you know, counter condition, you should desensitize the dog, whatever. I don't do it. I'm not going to tell you guys not to do that, but I've just found having, counter conditioned and desensitized many dogs over the years, I don't find it to be effective in most cases, which means if the dog's going to hate it, the dog is going to hate it. So when I go to put a muzzle on, I usually don't kind of do any pre-training. I put it on, I cinch it down really tight, I let the dog try to get it off. Okay. If you have a dog that you think really needs to use one, and again, another reason why I don't use muzzles very often, but if you think a dog really needs one and the dog is super strong, like, like a lot of muscle, maybe a boxer, a lot of the pitties and staffies and stuff like that, I highly suggest get some vet tape. You can get it, I'm sure, online. You can get it at most pet stores, and put it around the dew claw, okay? Because when they start trying to rip that thing off, which some dogs will start to do, they can very easily rip that dew claw. And if it's vet taped around, it won't be able to catch the dew claw on it, okay? I had that happen one time in a lesson. The client was like borderline freaking out. And it was just like, it was not fun for anybody involved. Obviously, it was traumatic for the dog. I was kind of ashamed of the whole situation. Hey, things happen. Nobody's perfect. But I learned from that. It was a long time ago. If I ever do need to, I'll vet tape them just in case they go real crazy. And again, you can take your time. I'm not telling you not to do things properly. I put a video on my in the course on just choosing a muzzle and how to go about conditioning it. So feel free to follow that. There's actually kind of a really cool thing that I learned from a French ring sport trainer. In French ring sport, your dog has to be muzzle trained. And basically what he does is he takes a Jafco and he cuts it about here. So I don't know how easy that is for you to see, but he cuts it about here. So it's like a half a muzzle. So he gets like two muzzles. So like a good one that he's going to use, during his trial. And then he cuts it about here. So it's less invasive. So there's nothing over the front, and he can feed. And it's not as much weight. So you can watch that video if you want to see that. There's lots of good ways of being able to do that. I know trainers will take those things, you can stick on things and put peanut butter on them, target training, all kinds of different stuff. Just because I don't do that, I'm not saying that you guys shouldn't. Okay. So again, this is just the way that I go about doing things. So like I said, if you need to do things differently, if you feel better, more comfortable conditioning things, go ahead and do that. Brachiocephalic dogs, which are basically dogs with very short noses, like pugs and Bostons, etc., and Frenchies. Also, bulldogs can be very difficult to get muzzles for. There are some custom ones that you can do. There's also a company called Bumas, which is, I think, located in Europe. I actually hadn't heard about them, but last year on our call, somebody mentioned them and I looked them up. I think they're actually custom ones that are made out of kind of a different material, very lightweight. So that might be another option, but dogs that are brachiocephalic, I very rarely will use muzzles on them. Like I said, with pugs, and you usually don't see that aggressive pug, but I've seen some really aggressive Frenchies, couple of Bostons over the years. It's very difficult to get muzzles for them. There are ones that you can get. They have like a mesh that goes over different things, but your mileage may vary. So just keep that in mind. Usually, I'll be completely honest, I just charge those people more money and I say, okay, I'm just going to do it without a muzzle. And it's just going to take us a little bit longer to do things properly, just because I do not like trying to keep a muzzle on one of those dogs. It's not fun. I think we are stuck again. So let me see. Oh, here we go. Safety slide. Okay, perfect. So getting into more about safety, never be close enough to be bitten without being prepared. So I keep my distance from my clients. Very, very important. Don't do stuff like don't turn your back, like simple little things like that. Like just be really diligent about where, if this dog is on a 6-foot leash, are you 7 feet away? Be cognizant of these things. Are you 8 feet away, 10 feet away? You know, it seems really ridiculous, but these things go a long way. If you're going to train dogs, reactive and aggressive dogs at scale, they sound stupid, but at the end of the day, they're important. Okay. Because my whole thing is I can't stay safe after working with, we probably have a couple, I don't know, for 300, 400 reactive and aggressive dogs come into our, onto our property over the year. And like, I can't do that safely if I'm not having the right systems and procedures set up, right? And the same thing goes for our trainers as well. Always examine your leashes, collars, gear, including the client stuff as well too. We often see terrible leashes with holes shoot through them, etc. We talked about that before. Use safety clips for prongs. So I'm going to talk about that when we go through our tools. But a safety clip just looks like this. If you're not familiar, I'll show you where to buy them if you decide that you want to buy something like that. Use back ties when needed. If you're not, if you don't know what a back tie is, a back tie just kind of comes from the sport dog training world, and it basically just means a strong leash that's connected to a wall or a tree or something that's not going to move, so you know exactly how far that dog is going to be able to go. There are times when I will use back ties. We'll probably talk about them at some point, but back ties can be very helpful. One of them being, I had a client come in recently, a couple of days ago. It was a woman in her late 60s, not super physically able. She also had an issue in her hand. And so I asked her, like, are you strong enough to hold your dog while I bring my dog in, whatever? And she was like, honestly, like, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. I'm like, hey, no problem. Boom, clip the dog up. I've got a really sturdy back tie. If you don't have a sturdy back tie, you can make one so you can put around a tree if you go to your client's house, simple little things like that. You can use double lines if needed. There is a video on the course about double lining if you want to check that out. But basically, it's just dog is in the middle. You have two slip leads on the dog, and then there's a person here and a person here so that the dog cannot redirect. So sometimes I use double lines, not very often, but dogs that are going to redirect, typically will use. Use fences as needed. So I have a fence on my property that I use all the time for socialization. I always like starting socialization through the fence. It's just like, it's just so much safer than just like, oh, let's go for a walk and all this kind of stuff. Just let them get it out of their system. If you ever do use a fence, if you are going to use a correction, bear in mind, you want the clients to be away from the fence, okay? I have notes on my fence that say stay away from the fence. You have to be in the middle of the area, because if that dog comes up to the fence, if I need to correct that dog for going after one of my dogs, I don't want the client being right there and potentially the dog redirecting, okay? So just keep that in mind if you ever do use a fence. If you're at a client's house and they don't have a fence, go down to a park and do it somewhere else, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be a fenced in thing, just a fence that's bordering a park or something like that. You can use, and I can always take a picture of my fence and show you guys if it's something that you guys are interested in. I don't have one on here, but it's just it's like maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. It's like a square. It's only about like maybe 6 feet high. And it's not a chain link. You can do chain link, but it's kind of like, picture like a white picket fence where it's like you've got the wooden slats. And I don't know. We actually built it for our kids, and I started using it for the dogs. And it's like, kids, sorry, you don't have a play yard anymore. But it's great. I use it all the time, every day. Take time to do things right. Don't cut corners to save times, or take clients' word for it. Like, I don't trust people. I'll be completely honest. Like, I used to trust people, and then I trained thousands of dogs. So that's that. Ask questions if their dog gets bitten for any reason. Look them in the eyes. We talked about that. Trust your gut. If your gut is ever saying something, or if you ever use your dogs as like a demo dog or something like that, man, the amount of times my dogs have like saved my ass. Like, I'm pretty good at reading dogs, but like I've like my dog BB. I'll show you BB. This is a picture. I think Megan actually gave this to me. Megan was here shadowing, and this is a painting that she made and sent to me after she was here. And It's very special to me, Megan. BB passed away about 4 or 5 months ago, and that dog was incredible at reading other dogs. He was the best dog I have ever known. I will never have a dog a tenth of as amazing as him. And anybody that has met him, Sarah's met him, and others will attest to the quality of his character. There were times that he literally saved my life. I believe it. He saved my other dogs' lives. And I say this only because if your dog is telling you something, you bloody better listen. Just listen. Okay. I could read him and he would just do certain things where I could just tell he was like, dude, like something is not right. And I would just stop. I'd put him in a kennel. I'd make sure that everybody is safe. And I'd reconvene. I'd bring it back and I'd bring it back and I'd bring it back. And sometimes I was working with I think it was a Cane Corso one time. And I just got this gut feeling that this dog was going to just try to eat me. And the client was like, oh, no, he likes you and all this kind of stuff. And I'm working with this dog and I just got this gut. So I bring in BB and BB's like, dude, something is totally wrong. So it was like double, like I saw it and then he saw it. Long story short, this is one of the few times that I had something very, very bad happen. I warned the clients that their dog was extremely human aggressive, and the dog ended up biting somebody that they let their guard down. It was the owner's sister. The dog bit her on the top of the head, and she had to have reconstructive surgery. Imagine a mastiff grabbing you by the head. They did not heed my warnings. They did not believe in me. I trusted my gut to keep myself and my dog safe. And I reiterated it with them so many times. I literally put on a bite suit just to get the dog on a place. And the dog didn't do anything aggressive, but I just trusted my gut and trusted my dog's gut so much. I'm not joking when I say, guys, gals, anybody that's listening, if your gut says, dude, there's something wrong, do something about it. Okay. This is serious. Okay. Don't go into somebody's home unless the dog is leashed. I always like to bring a slip leash as well too. So you want to tell the people, I think this is on the next slide too, but you want to tell the people before exactly what is expected. So if you're going to somebody's house, you need to email them, call them, whatever you need to do to tell them, hey, I'm not coming into your house until your dog has a tightly fitted collar that they can't back out of, and you need to be holding onto the leash. I know it sounds ridiculous to say you need to be holding onto the leash, but ask me how I know. Because people will let their dog drag the leash and be like, oh yeah, just come in. And I'll be like, yo, the leash. And they're like, he's got a leash on, right? And to that, my comment was always, well, that's about as useful as a condom in your pocket, but let's not split hairs here. Okay. Like, hold on to the leash, have a tightly fitted collar on your dog. Very important. They need to know this. Do not go into somebody's house unless they have that, or the dog is put in a kennel behind a locked door, etc. Like even a locked door, I've seen dogs like, tweak the handles and get out of doors and stuff, right? So like I suggest a kennel behind a locked door. If they can't, if they don't want to do the leash, tightly fitted collar, etc. Have an extra e-collar that you can control the dog. So sometimes I'll do this where if I'm like questioning, like, is the client going to be like on time, like with the correction? Are they going to be able to go up and down appropriately, etc.? I'll just give them an extra e-collar. I'll give them my e-collar, and then they can do their thing. And I'll just say, I'm not going to step in unless I need to. Okay. So that can be something that can be helpful. I don't know any other trainers that do that. If you do, awesome. I find it advantageous at times. I don't use it all the time, but sometimes I will. Another thing we talked about before, remember that most dogs are bitten by social dogs. We talked about that, of course. Never assume that the dog will be fine. Assume that every dog is going to try to bite you. I wanted to reiterate that because it is very important. Okay, So just a couple of things. This is more for like in-home stuff, but always carry a clipboard and a briefcase with you when you go to a client's house. My mentor taught me this. Duke Ferguson was my mentor for a long time. And he always taught me, have a clipboard, have a briefcase, because if you go into a home and something happens, you can block the dog with your briefcase. Okay. Clipboards too, if you're sitting down at somebody's couch and whatever, and something happens and you need to, like, right, like, have something there. It's helpful, never enter a home unless they're leashed. We talked about that, obviously. Remind them via email. Never let dogs go behind you in lessons. Very important for obvious reasons. Most dogs that bite people bite them from behind, so keep that in mind. There's apps that you can use to track your safety via GPS. I think the one that I was promoting for a while is called Be Safe. I think it's just the letter B and then safe. BeSafeApp.com, I want to say. But basically, this app specifically, if you're somebody that's concerned about your safety, you can program. Let's say I'm gonna say, let's say you're a female who's concerned going into people's houses, which I completely understand with, or maybe a guy for that matter. And let's say you've got a spouse, and you can basically put their name into their name and phone number into the app, and it basically says, okay, has like a little calendar in it. Okay, I'm gonna be at this house between 1 and 2:30. If your phone does not leave that property by 2:30, it sends a text message to your partner or whoever's on your account there, and they basically get an alert that says, hey, Sarah has not left this appointment. You might want to check in with her. Okay, so that might be something for somebody to look into if they're concerned about safety. Which there's crazy people out there. I didn't really have a problem with it, but it is what it is. Trusting your gut, we talked about before. Don't stare at dogs, just avoid them. Don't try to, just avoid conflict. Like, you don't need to make things work, worse than they are. If you just don't look at dogs and don't pay attention to them, a lot of them are not going to do a whole lot, right? Like, they're just kind of like, okay, this guy's fine. He's not pushing me. He's not giving me eye contact. He's not making kissy noises and whatever. So, no reason to like spark the dog up, especially in the beginning, maybe in the proofing section, but in the beginning, no reason to do that. Do you even need to work with the dog, or is it safer to have the client do the heavy lifting? This is something I've been doing more of lately because I have some, let's say, I don't know, health issues. I have a hernia, which makes it difficult. And I've got not the best back. Early in my career, it was like, yeah, no problem, 150-pound massive. No, yeah, just give me the damn leash. And it's just like, I just did stuff that I shouldn't have done. Whereas in reality, like now, I'll get the clients to do a lot of that stuff, the heavy lifting. And then when the dog is, a little bit more streamlined, then I can take over. The clients don't worry about it. They've been dealing with it for the last 5 years. They don't care. So, if the dog is really that strong and that powerful, I'll let them do the first 10, 15 minutes, get the dog kind of squared away, and then I'll take over. So you don't always have to just be like, oh, I'm just the dog trainer. I'm just going to come in. I'm just going to work with the dog right away. Sometimes it's just safer, better to just have the clients do some of that stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about tools now. We talked a little bit about muzzles before. I brought a couple of tools here. I'm sure there's lots more. I just went out to the shop and grabbed a couple of tools. This is a bait bag that I really like. I like it because it's got a little like belt clip that you can easily hand it to your clients. I know a lot of trainers prefer the ones that have like a whole belt that goes around, but I prefer, maybe you have one like that, but you have one, that you can bring to your clients or whatever, that they can easily just clip onto their pants or their jacket or whatever. So I really like these ones that just easy to go on and off and to give to a client if you're out at the park or something like that. So that's one thing. Furminators, you're dealing with like Huskies and Malamutes and, some of these dogs with like a lot of fur. I'm always a big Furminator guy. If I get dogs like that in and we're going to do e-collar, I make them buy a Furminator and de-shed their dog 3 times before they come in initially for training. I tell them it has to be a Furminator brand, or else like don't buy anything else. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, I have one of those. And then they bring it into the lesson and it's like a comb. It's like, sorry, that doesn't work that way. So I tell them it has to be a Furminator, and they don't have to do the whole dog's whole body, but if you're going to do e-collar, make sure that they do the neck. So, you know, very, very keen on that. Let's talk a little bit about prong collars. So these are the prong collars that I like. These are from a company called, and Sarah, you want to put the link in there for me? Thanks. These are from a company called canineleashesandcollars.com. Leslie Pierney. Oh, it's already on the screen. Perfect. But put it in the chat as well. I like them for one reason, because they have a clip on the side. You can have the clients clip it around, clip on, and then you attach your leash here. Okay. I know a lot of people like, oh, I don't use anything unless it's Herm Springer and like blah, blah, blah. Okay. I got it. I got no problem with that. I'm not here to tell you have to use these things. But when you're dealing with a 75-year-old grandmother who's trying to put a prong collar on her dog and it's fidgeting around and she doesn't have the hand strength to like pop the thing in, like these are so much easier for people to put on. Okay. So I'd highly suggest it. They're cheap. I think I pay like 10 or 12 bucks for these. They're very inexpensive. They come in 2 different sizes. This is a large to extra large, and this is a small to medium. So usually when I order them, I order about, I don't know, I usually order about like, let's say I ordered 100, I would order like maybe 60 of these and about 40 of these. That's kind of the ratio that I use, but your mileage may vary. This is called a safety clip, and it basically just has 2 clips on it. I use these for every dog that does prong collar. There's lots of dogs that I don't use prong collars on. We can talk about that if you have a specific question about that. But basically the idea is, I'll use a long line here because I don't have a normal leash. But basically what you do is you have your prong collar on the dog, and then this is your leash. This attaches here, okay? And then this safety attaches to the end of the leash here, okay? And then it would attach to an extra collar, okay? It could be a buckle collar, it could be anything. Basically, the idea is, one, if this breaks, the dog is still connected through the safety through here, which is very uncommon, but I've seen it happen, okay? Or 2, if something happens to the prong, the dog is still on here. I know a lot of trainers that don't do this, and I've seen dogs get out of prong collars so many times, okay? And so I make all of my clients have one of these. They're like $2, right? It's like, come on, like it's $2. You could save a dog's life. You know, if you have a client and somehow wiggles out of a collar and gets, you know, crushed by a car or something like that, not ideal. So those you can buy from, yeah, hey, if you want to use Herm Springer and you want to use these as safeties, you can buy them from Leslie. So that's a good option. Those are the only prong collars that I use personally. This is a grabber that I use for if I've got a dog that is that the clients can't put a muzzle on. There's a video in the course, by the way, on how to do that. But this is a grabber that I bought at like Walmart or the dollar store or something like that. It's not super strong, so I put some duct tape on it to make it a little bit stronger. Like you can't really find good quality ones like this, I don't think. But I've been using it for many years, where I'll just attach the muzzle. Basically, I attach the muzzle. Go back and watch the video. I'm not going to do it for you guys now, but you basically just grab it like this, and you can put it over the dog's head. And then once you grab this tab in the back, then basically you'll cinch down almost like a slip lead. So that's a good tool to have in the toolbox. Throw it in your vehicle when you're going around to clients if you're dealing with dogs like that. This is a transitional leash. I don't think I have any resources on the course on this. Honestly, I rarely use them. I know that there's some trainers on the call who use them a lot. I'm not trying to say that I have a better way or anything like this. I just don't use them because I find that the majority of dogs that are on transitional leashes, it's a huge battle to get them over the initial training, just like a muzzle, right? Where they hate having stuff over their muzzles. I've just seen dogs completely flip out, lose their minds. Clients are just like crying on the couch. And it's like, oh my God, I'd rather just throw a prong collar on it. We're not going to have to deal with any of that trouble. But they can be advantageous for really, really high drive German Shepherds, usually like the working lines, and some of the pitties and staffies that we have come in. And so typically I'll use these on dogs that are very easily physically stimulated. So if you've ever seen a dog that's just like, if you touch them, they're just like that, right? When they get aroused, those are really, really good. And it's usually with like I said, like high drive working Shepherds and some of the pitties and staffies. So this can be helpful because it tends to like bring their escalation down exponentially. So if I have 100 reactive and aggressive dogs that come in, I might use 2, 3 of these. I don't use them very often. I try not to, but sometimes they're just the ticket. So you might want to use them. And hey, you might want to use them with all your clients. You can get them at caninelifeline.org or something. Maybe Sarah can put it in the chat if you wouldn't mind. I'll just go through real briefly about the only e-collar that I use. I only use EZ900 from e-collar Technologies. I used to use Dogtra. I hate Dogtra with a passion. They don't give a crap about dog trainers. I'm sorry, like I don't like talking crap about other people, but they do not care about trainers. They made that very adamant when I was with them for many, many years. And so I do not support Dogtra for that reason. e-collar Technologies has a great warranty, lots of great units. I prefer the EZ900 because I use a tone and a continuous stim. It's very easy for our clients. I don't like the round remotes. I know a lot of you trainers do, and that's personal preference, but I find that this sits in my hand a lot easier. I don't like the puck design, and a lot of my clients don't like that design either. So I prefer to use the EZ900. Now, I do not, when I order from e-collar Technologies, I do not order the standard unit. I order just the normal remote, and I upgrade the receiver to the RX120 receiver, which looks like this. It's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit bigger in size. It's also got a little bit more top end on the stem, which means if you've got a dog that's it's going to try to push through that stem, you can very easily, it's pretty easy for a super aggressive dog to decide, you know what, that normal RX090, I'm just going to bust through that when I want to get aggressive. And so I put these on 95% of dogs that come in. There are cases when I will use a double receiver where we'll actually add an extra receiver, put it on the same strap and link it to the same frequency. That's pretty uncommon, but there are some dogs that I will do that with. If you have questions about that, I'm sure we can talk about that at some point. But this is my e-collar of choice. This is like, I love it. It's great. I've used all of their different things. It's still my favorite. Like I have the Easy Educator, and it's got all the bells and whistles. Like, and I never use it. Like, I just don't. Like, this is all that I ever use. It's just the best for me. There's other e-collars out there, so feel free to do whatever you want, but that's just the one that I really like. Most of the clients that come in, I upgrade to the 3/4 inch thick hair contact points. They're like, I don't know, $5 a set or something. They're not very expensive. So, we train a lot of German Shepherds, thick hair dogs, that kind of stuff. We use those on a lot of our clients' dogs. It comes with just smaller contacts, which are good for, a lot of labs and Rotties and stuff like that. But we always keep a bunch of these in stock because we use them all the time. There's also a set of Extreme Ultra wings, which you can get through e-collar Technologies, which I don't think you can get through any other companies, which is great. But basically, I forgot to bring one. It's basically a plate that sits on here. You get rid of these contact points, and it's got 2 little wings. If you're familiar with like Martin systems, they've got wing tips and stuff like that. It's basically an adapter that goes on for really thick hair dogs. So we do keep those in stock just in case we need to. And that's that. So we use e-collar for literally every one of our reactive and aggressive dogs, unless it's only a walk doctor program, which means like 1 out of every 30 clients might sign up to this program. and they're only struggling with leash walking, we typically do a prong collar for that dog. If I have a client who has multiple dogs, 2 or 3 dogs, I tend to also suggest prong collars, just because it's hard when you're walking multiple dogs and trying to do the remote at the same time. So that's kind of where we use prong collars. That's probably a question people would have. But we do e-collar on most of our clients' dogs, because most of our clients' dogs have leash pulling issues, which you can use e-collar for. They have off-leash issues. They have behavioral problems. They're barking at the fence. They're attacking other dogs, all this kind of stuff. It's just a very, very versatile tool. So, excuse me, that's why we tend to use that. I mentioned in here bonker. I honestly haven't used the bonker in many, many years, but there is a time and a place for it. Bonker is, you can look up videos on YouTube, but basically it's just a rolled up towel, and you can give a dog a swat on the nose. It can be very effective if you use it properly. I don't really use it because I'm doing e-collars for a lot of my clients' dogs, but heck, you want to stop a dog, a puppy that's like nipping its owner, making them bleed 20 times a day. It's a really good tool to have in the toolbox if you convince the owner to use it. Very, very effective for like puppy biting and stuff like that. So something to look at. You may decide not to use it, but it's out there. You can use obviously gentle leaders, halties, which are very similar in technique, kind of similar to the transitional leash. I just prefer these a little bit better, where it's a leash and a collar in one. There's also a perfect pace collar, which is kind of similar, that you might want to look up. It's a kind of a hybrid of the gentle leader and the halty. I'm not a huge fan of like head collars, but there's time and a place for them. So feel free to be using those things. Okay, so that's that. Okay, I think this is the last slide, and then we'll get into our Q&A. I don't know what we're doing for time. I don't have a clock anywhere near me because I turned off my phone. But we'll have lots of time for Q&A. So
it's been an hour and a half, Ted.
Oh man, already. Oh, perfect. Okay, so okay, no questions and answers today. Just kidding. Okay, so I'll go through these kind of briefly. But boxers almost always redirect when they're leash reactive, so keep that in mind. Herding dogs, cattle dogs, kelpies, all that kind of stuff, they're super OCD. You got to give them a job. They have to be doing something. They're super manipulative, so be cognizant of that stuff. We can talk about these things. I'm sure people have questions about their clients' dogs, maybe their own dogs and stuff. German Shepherds, probably my least favorite breed, to be completely honest, even though I'm a Malinois guy. Just so much whining, so much anxiety. The terrible German Shepherd breeders in my area. I know there's some well-bred German Shepherds out there, and I've met some of them, and they're incredible dogs. But the crap that's being produced in my area, not a huge fan. Very, very whiny. They tend to have what we call line of sight separation anxiety, which means, let's say there's a couple, one of them walks 10 feet ahead and wants to go and get the mail. The dog's all this crap. So we see that a lot. They tend to not run away, which is good because they tend to be really needy. So that's kind of helpful. Training them off leash is usually not very difficult. Livestock guardians, there is a blog on the topic if you guys want to go through on the course. I have some very deep thoughts on livestock guardians. I just don't see the point. Why you need to live in the city, have a 120-pound dog that's bred to guard things, and then call me when your dog is 11 months old, has already bitten 5 people, and you can't understand why he's behaving this way. The last time I checked, Google was a thing, and you should be able to look up the breed. I do not like working with them. I've worked with a ton of them in the past, but it sucks because there is nothing biologically appropriate that you can do for these dogs. All that you have to do is shut them down. It is the worst part of my job. I hate doing it, but I will do it to save a dog's life. Not a huge fan of livestock guardians. I see a lot of Pyrenees. It's just like, not a fan. Bully breeds, see a lot of those. Tend to see very high pain thresholds, tend to see very high prey drives, can be very dramatic at times, Huskies, by the way, oh, I didn't mention Huskies in here. Very dramatic as a breed. A lot of the northern breeds are. Bully breeds. Hey, let's just be honest. If we're talking dog aggression, the vast majority of dogs that kill other dogs are bully breeds. Okay. I've got all the books that have all the statistics. There's actually not very many of them about dogs that kill people, dogs that kill dogs, all the statistics going back to the 60s. Kenneth actually sent me one of these books. So shout out to Kenneth. Thank you very much. Maybe Kenneth, if you're watching, you could put the title of it if you remember the title of it. I can't remember what it is. I think it's in the shop. But I love bully breeds. I have considered owning one. Huge bully breed guy, but when you're dealing with aggression, they can be very aggressive at times. So I'm not anti bully breed. I'm not anti any breed. Like, I love all dogs, but you got to be realistic sometimes. Okay, if the vast majority of dogs that came in that I've worked with that have killed other dogs, I think every single one of them, except maybe 2 German Shepherds, was like a pity or Staffy. Little dogs, annoying. I don't train them. I'm not a fan. I don't really like the people. I know there's some people that like them and specialize in them and all this kind of stuff. It's not my thing. I just send them to other trainers. If you have more questions, I can elaborate, but I'm not a big fan. Chesapeake Bay Retrievers, especially the males, very dominant and tend to have really bad resource guarding in a lot of cases. Not so much the females, but watch the males. Labs, best dogs ever. Come on, easy. I always tell people, like, people call me up and they're like, oh, I got a Canet Corso and we're putting him down because he bit my kid and whatever. And I'm like, get yourself the fattest, stupidest Labrador Retriever you can possibly find. And they're like, oh my God, I would never own a lab, whatever. I'm like, you're the one who just got their kid like bit up and just got back from the ER. Like, maybe you want to think about the advice I'm giving you. So a lot of people, for whatever reason, they don't like labs, but I've got kids, I've got dogs. It's so much easier. You don't tend to see a lot of problems with labs. I've seen very few aggressive labs. Some reactivity over the years, but very few actual aggressive cases. They do happen and they can have resource guarding because they tend to be very food motivated. Poodles, easiest dogs in the world to train. Never worked with one that like made me think at all. I literally have a poodle price where poodles get a discount because they're that easy. Weird semi-feral dogs from the islands. Oh man, we get so many of these dogs. It's just like, they're difficult. Like, a lot of them, pulled off the street, bad genetics, this kind of stuff. They're just kind of a different thing altogether. You just really, like, they're so insecure. It's just very intricate. We can elaborate more on that more as the weeks progress, if you guys have any specific questions on that. But they're dogs at the end of the day. Some people like call me up, they're like, oh, I've got a pot cake. Oh, they're super rare breed. They're like not even like dogs. They're like a totally different thing. They're almost like a different species or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I've trained a bunch of them. They're dogs. You're like, come on, like, no, they're not special in any way. Like, they're just dogs that are sketchy. Like, let's just be honest, okay? Like, so yeah, I tend to do a lot of food-based training with them, build up their food drive with those sketchy ones. But we can elaborate more if you guys have specific questions. Okay, I'm going to go through this quickly and then we will get through our questions. I did not want to have a whole conversation on how to break up a dog fight. The reason for this is I don't believe that if you're doing things safely, you should have to break up a dog fight. I've never broken up a dog fight. I've seen some fights at like parks and stuff like this. I had one interaction at a group class where a dog grabbed another dog by the ear. I was able to break it up like that. Both dogs had e-collars on. It was easy. It was no big deal. But I would highly suggest that if you're breaking up dog fights, and again, I'm not trying to judge anybody, you're doing something wrong. Okay. I also understand that there are extenuating circumstances where something can happen that is out of your control. Case in point, you're at the park with your dog, or maybe a client, a dog comes out of nowhere, attacks your dog. That dog is not wearing an e-collar, and you're just in a crappy situation. Okay. I thought I was going to bring a slip lead, but I didn't bring one, so I'll have to use this is basically a slip lead, the transitional. Okay, so basically what you can do is you can use a slip lead. Okay, so if you ever go anywhere with your dog or client's dog, bring a slip lead in case something tragic happens and a dog runs over to your dog or something like that, and you have to break up a fight. If the dogs are actually to the point where like a dog is locked on, which is very common, especially with pitties and staffies, the only thing that there's only two ways of doing it safely in my estimation. Okay, basically what you can do is if the dog is locked on, you can get underneath it, you can put the leash underneath like this. Okay, you can put the handle through the slip lead component. Okay, and now you've got a slip lead on the dog. Okay, if you know this is not really a slip lead, but you get my point. Okay, because I didn't bring one, I forgot one. Okay, I do also use slip leads, but very rarely. If the dog is really sketchy and I think they're going to pop out of it, I might use it, but most of my clients just use whatever they have. Doesn't really matter. If the dog has a really, let's say a really loose collar, I'll suggest they go buy a martingale collar typically. So remember, if the dog is locked on, you can't just throw the slip lead over the dog because there's a dog in between the mouth, obviously, right? So having said that, the best way to go about doing it is do it where you can put it underneath the dog like that, and then you go through like this, and now you have a slip lead on the dog. If the dog is that serious, you pull up like this, and the dog will not be able to breathe. It will go unconscious. It will let go when it goes unconscious. Typically, they will. I've never done this, so I can't tell you, but from what I understand, from what I've heard from other trainers that have had to do this, unfortunately, typically after 10 to 30 seconds, they will come back to consciousness. At that point, you have a leash on them, and usually they will be a little bit calmer at that point. But again, that's one way of being able to do it. Another way, which one of the guys on the call here, Mo, who owns our Mango Dogs location in Charlotte, North Carolina, he was at a park with his dog doing some obedience. Two dogs got into a fight. One of the dogs grabbed, it was a pitty and a mastiff, if I remember correctly. One of the dogs grabbed the other dog, had its head in its mouth, and was completely locked on. He took his e-collar off of his dog, put his dog in a downstay, ran over, told the guy, here, put this e-collar on your dog. 100 continuous. The dog just went, let the dog go, and he saved that dog's life. Okay, so if something happens and your dog has an e-collar on and your dog is being attacked, you could take it off. If another dog is locked on, and you could put it on another dog. Do not start at a lower level. You go as high as it possibly can. Another reason why you don't want to have an RX 090, small out of the box e-collar. It's much better to have, a 120 just in case something like that ever does happen. So those are the two ways that you can do it. I hope that none of you ever have to break up a dog fight. I hope that it's never something that I have to do, but these are the safest ways that I can understand of being able to go about doing it. I see a lot of people like, oh no, you got to put them in a triangle choke and you have to choke them out. I'm not going to call out the trainers that teach people to do this in their seminars, but it's stupid. It's irresponsible. It's super dangerous. Somebody is going to get seriously attacked. Do not put your head right next to another dog that's locked onto another dog. You could get maimed. You could get literally killed. Okay. Don't try to be some sort of a hero and choke a dog out. Do things in a safer way. Slip a leash underneath, boom, we're done. Or put the e-collar on, get a leash on at the same time. just to be extra safe. And that's another good alternative. Okay. Don't put your hands in there unless you absolutely have to. This is the thing I always tell people, like, listen, if you're at a park and something happens, like, don't just run in there. Like, a dog is not going to kill another dog unless it's like a big dog with like a 10-pound Chiweenie. Like, you know, two big dogs, like a German Shepherd and a Pit Bull, are not going to kill each other in 5 seconds. Like, you can stop, you can assess, you can break things down, look for an adequate time, figure out what needs to happen. But I have seen so many pictures of people that got absolutely mangled and hospitalized because they ran in there, their own dog redirected and just nailed them and just bit them. Like, I'm not making these stories up. I have gruesome photos, like tons of them. I have like a whole hard drive full of them that trainers have sent me, like, oh my God, you were so right. I shouldn't have done this. Look what happened. I'm in the hospital. Like, these are not hypotheticals, okay? So please take them to heart. And, you know, at the last part, remember, make the dog safe, make it look good. We'll talk about that more as we move on. Again, another slide. If you have questions, you can contact me this way. We're going to go through the chat now. But like I said, if you need to contact me throughout the week, feel free to reach out via phone or email. I don't text message, so phone or email is good if you want to do that. Okay, let's get out of here. We'll stop the share and we'll get into the Q&A. Are you able to highlight the questions, Sarah? You mentioned doing that.
I was not. I've been trying to figure that out the whole thing, but I did write down everybody's questions according to when they posted them. So I do have everybody written down. So Daniel Dowling, what's up, buddy? First question, something about homework. Do you send them a like an email or something, homework on theory, before you meet with them in your first lesson?
I don't, but I would not be, you know, against doing something like that. I do an evaluation, so I kind of talk them through some of that stuff in the evaluation. But yeah, the more stuff you can send people in the beginning, just try to make it not too much stuff because it might overwhelm people. But yeah, personally, I don't do any theory, literally. It's just that 30-60 second spiel. And in the evaluation, I do that and I walk them through why we're going to be using Food Toys Praise as well as eCollar. So, but if you want to, I think that's a great thing to do.
I can also, you guys, if I say your name, go ahead and unmute yourself, and then you can share your own question that you had. And I'll just give you the leading up question that you had. So
if it's a more intricate question, I think we'll bring the people in. But if they're basic questions, I'd prefer if you could just read them and try to get through them as quickly as possible.
Okay. Melissa O'Neill had a question about how do you, so she uses a lot of crate decompression in her board and trains, just letting the dogs sit and chill for a few days before she does any work with them. And she finds that a lot of them aren't even crate trained yet. So she's having to do that. How do you do that in your program, if you do that in a private session situation? Same thing you would do with a muzzle?
I haven't suggested a crate in probably 5 years. So I don't know. I'd have to think a little bit further on how I would go about doing it. I don't really work with a ton of separation anxiety. Obviously, if you're doing a board and train, you need those dogs to be in crates. I understand. When I was doing board and trains, I would, you know, one of the things that you might do is to say like, hey, this dog has to be really good and hungry when it comes in for the board and train. So maybe like cut the dog's food back for a couple of days so that it's not so difficult to get the dog in the crate, where, you know, only feed the dog in the crate, right? Like no training for week 1, no going outside, e-collar conditioning. It's literally like you go in the crate, you get a bit of food, and that's it, right? The only time that dog gets food is by going in that crate. And so, you know, you'll see dogs go without eating because they're in a new place and they're stressed out, but that's the best way of doing it. I don't suggest doing it any other way. If you have a dog that is not going in there, you can take a long line and you can feed it through the back of the crate. I don't have one in my room here, but you can feed it through the back of the crate, and then you can just go like that, and you can just pull them in. If you're in a pinch and you have to. But yeah, I just use Food Drive, and the reason for it is because If the dog knows that's the only way they get food, right, then they're much more likely to go in there and do it, right? And the cool thing is it's on their terms. You're not forcing the dog to do it, right? I know some trainers that are like pressure on, pressure on, pressure on, pressure off, pressure on, pressure off, and that's fine and everything. But I find those dogs are more reluctant to going in the crate when they go home after the board and train, because the clients might not do it so much. Whereas if the dog always gets fed in there, and if the dog won't go in and eat, okay. Another thing too that I should have mentioned, if you put the food in there and the dog won't go, give him 5 seconds to eat. If he won't, take the food out and make him go in, okay? Because if you keep the food in there and you make him go in, he's going to eat the food, and then he's going to realize that he can be stubborn and not go in on his own volition. So I basically remove that meal.
I think you answered my question in the very beginning, because that's everything that I do in a board and train, but trying to learn how you do what you do without a board and train. So you don't crate train in your program.
Unless the dog is severely like destroying the house. And in most cases, you can just relegate the dog to going to, like, maybe have an extra mud room that the dog is more comfortable in or something like that, right? There's a really good book on the topic. Maybe you've already read it, but it's called Separation Anxiety versus Containment Phobia. I highly suggest all of you read it who have not read it. And it basically outlines the difference between separation anxiety and dogs that have containment phobia. There are a lot of dogs that are misdiagnosed with separation anxiety, when in reality, they have a phobia of being contained, right? Like it's like being claustrophobic to a degree. So I just don't find that it's needed the vast majority of the time. There are some clients that come in that the dogs are already crate trained, which is fine. But again, I don't think I've had a conversation with a client for probably 5 years that said like, okay, you have to crate train your dog for this reason. So there are cases, but I don't think that they're as important as most people make them out to be. Now, you're going to need to have them in crates while they're doing a board and train. I get that. Like, I'm not, like, what are you going to do? Have a bunch of dogs run around your house? Like, no, it's not going to work. But, the clients may not need to crate the dog when they go home. And let's just be honest, the more you force your clients to do, a lot of them won't do it. Like, I can guarantee you that the vast majority of your clients, when the dog goes home, they don't crate train their dogs, right? So just bear that in mind. Okay.
Camila Sanderson, she said, can fear be triggered sorry, Camille, why don't you unmute yourself? This was kind of an interesting question. It was basically a fear aggression bite can that lead to multiple successive bites if the dog has been triggered?
Yeah, so you had said that generally dogs are either biting, if they're fearful, they're biting and then they're backing off. But can you get a situation where the dog is truly fearful but thinks it lacks the ability to back off?
Why would it lack the ability to back off?
Well, that's the question.
So you mean like somebody is forcing it to do something and it lacks it, or it physically, like it mentally does not have the ability to back off on its own?
Yeah, I would go with like more of neurological, the mental ability to back off.
Do you have a specific case that happened with?
Absolutely. And I'm referring to my own dog that I had put down in the summertime. He had a endocrine disorder, very thyroid symptoms, so fearfully triggered, but he had every opportunity to back off. He just didn't.
I'd have to look a little bit more specifically into the situation, but the first question I would ask, because I can't remember, I know we talked about this dog at some point, but I would want to know, did the dog have any other history of aggression, because typically when there's a medical issue, there's also other indications of like, you know, there's all kinds of other stuff going on, like like really bad genetics and all kinds of different stuff. So in most cases, like, think of it this way, right? Here's the way that I describe fear. Fear is the first time I remember feeling fearful, I went for a road trip with my parents, and we were going through Detroit. And my dad, this is before like GPS and stuff. We're running out of gas, so we go into Detroit, and we went into this like really bad neighborhood. And my dad's like, "Hey, everybody, sit in the car. I'm gonna lock the doors. Don't talk to anybody, and just shut your face. Look at the ground. I'm gonna go in and pay for the gas, and then we're gonna get out of here as quickly as we can." So he goes and pumps. As soon as he leaves to go into the store to pay, a couple of seedy guys walk around the car, and they're kind of looking at us funny and whatever. I'm just looking at the ground. I didn't say it. I didn't say a damn word, right? And I was truly fearful. I was fearful for my life. Their eyes were bloodshot. They were clearly up to no good. I don't want to marginalize these people because I'm sure, they were, in a difficult situation, but I was very scared for my own personal safety. My father told me what to do, but I believe that if he didn't tell me to do anything, my response would have been the same. Okay? Just as your response genetically, if you're any animal, whether it be a human being or a bird or a mouse, when you see a snake, your genetic predisposition is to back away from it. Okay? This is what I'm talking about when I talk about fear. I do not believe that a dog that attacks somebody is fearful. Now, we can have the conversation and say, maybe it's a neurological thing, and we can talk more about that, in the future, and, you're a friend of mine, so you can pick up the phone and call me if you want to talk more about it, right? Be glad to do that. But in my estimation, that is not fear. That is not the avoidance of aggression when a dog is biting somebody repeatedly, putting holes in them when that person hasn't really triggered them, okay? That's not a fearful response. That is, I am triggered. You did something to me. Maybe the dog is, not well or whatever, but you did something to me, and so I will do this. So here's another point I would also give. Camellia and a lot of you guys have met my dog BB, right? And when he was 7, he had some very difficult back problems that I really struggled to get to the root of. I ended up meeting a fabulous veterinarian who does amazing chiro work that literally saved his life. It was incredible. But I remember one time he lay down on his bed. He screamed out in pain. I went over to him just to make sure he was okay and try to calm him down. This is a dog who's like very stoic, like super high pain threshold. So he was in agonizing pain. I go over to him, I calm him down, everything is fine. And then I must have touched him in a place that caused him to be in pain. And I'll never forget it till the day I die. He was laying on his side like this, okay? Like this. And I was touching him here, and he went like this. He was this close to biting me, and he stopped himself, okay? He had the impulse control to stop, even though his natural reaction was a knee-jerk reaction. I am in pain, so I need to bite because I am in pain. That was his reflexive response. Because he knew that I was not trying to hurt him, he had the impulse control to be able to stop himself. So when a client, I'm not suggesting you, but when a client says, "Oh, my dog is in so much pain because, he doesn't like it when he goes to the groomer and all this kind of stuff," it's like, then how does my dog, who's in 10 times the amount of pain, not bite me? Like, dogs have the ability to choose whether they bite or they don't bite. And even if he did bite me, I can guarantee you that it would not have been a sustained attack on me, because essentially what that dog is doing that is, quote, fearful, when they continuously bite you and they're trying to take you off of the face of the planet is what happens is there is a trigger to the response. There's always an underlying level of stress that that dog is living with, right? Whether it's neurological, whether it's, just stress in the house. Maybe the dog is living in a chaotic household. There's too many dogs in the place. There's all these different things, bad genetics, all this kind of stuff, right? So there's all this stuff that's leading into it. Then the dog gets triggered, and then the dog goes way too far with that trigger, okay? I represent this in my own life where I am triggered by my children. My children are very loud. They are very noisy. They're great kids, but they are a lot to deal with, okay? And sometimes I get triggered by them where I will raise my voice a little bit. However, it is not okay for me that when I am triggered because my ears hurt, I have a headache, I just worked a 16-hour day, for me to slam my kids against the fridge and then break their legs. That is not a normal response, okay?
Right.
And when dogs do things like that, it is not normal. If your dog is afraid, I would give him the benefit of the doubt and say, he is scared, he is sensitive, he has something wrong with him, and he nips at you for this reason to try to get you to leave him alone. But a dog that will try to put somebody in the hospital, that is not a fearful response. There's nothing that will ever convince me of it, because I've seen enough dogs to know that there's something else that's going on in that context. So
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question, because it's a very, very complicated question to answer. And we could literally take hours just breaking down everything, the dog's history, where the dog came from, all that kind of stuff, right? But knowing a little bit about the situation, we know the dog is very badly bred. The dog had a checkered past, all this kind of stuff. And it was a very, very difficult situation for you to deal with. And I have a huge amount of empathy for that. But if there is fear, there is a component of fear. Fear was not in the driver's seat when that dog is trying to attack somebody and put them in the hospital. That was maybe a trigger, and then something else took over.
Yeah.
When it could have been a fear, and then rage took over.
Yeah,
and that's what it sounded like to me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next question.
All right. We got more questions.
Hey, I got all night, so if you guys can't stick around, the replays will be on if you want to check them out later on. I know it's been
if anybody needs to drop off, go ahead and drop off. We'll just keep this recording, and Ted will have it for posted later.
Yep.
Val, she wanted to know what your definition of territorial aggression is. Is that fear, or is that assholery?
The vast majority of the time, it is like what I would classify as like offensive, right? It's like, does the average dog really need to be that concerned about like somebody or another dog coming onto their property and like taking their sexual partner, like, or something of that nature, right? It's like, if a dog comes onto their property, it's like most dogs that are territorial just absolutely lose their mind the second another dog walks around the property, and that dog hasn't even walked onto the property, right? So the dog is massively overcompensating in the vast majority of situations, right? Could there be an element of fear in there? Probably. If a really nasty dog comes under their property and tries to attack them on their own property, and the dog is, let's say, territorial in that environment, sure. In extenuating circumstances, of course, yeah, I agree. But the vast majority of territorial dogs that I work with, no, they're choosing to do that. They're choosing to be that way, right? They're like, oh, somebody comes into my house, like, oh, like, you're going to tell me I can't get on the couch right now, or whatever the context is. And, that is typically more of a defensive kind of a posturing, right? Here, let me give you a lens to look through, right? So we talked a bit about fear. If you advocate for the dog, you give them options and you show them that they're safe, right? If it's fear, that it'll work, okay? if you were to advocate for a territorial dog and said like, oh, every time a dog walks by, like, I'm going to make sure he doesn't go anywhere near you, and I'm going to give you lots of treats, and I'm going to do all this kind of stuff, do you think that that would be effective? Of course not. It wouldn't work, right? So with actual fear, right, a dog has been attacked by another dog, or he's sketchy with new people because he was never socialized, or he's just got terrible genetics or whatever, like, yeah, advocating for a dog will make it better. Okay. But if you have a territorial dog and you try to use the, like, let's say, fear-based training tactics on a dog that's offensive aggression, it doesn't work. So that's a really easy way to try to understand, like, if I try the fearful stuff in advocating, if it works, okay, it was fearful. If it makes the dog more arrogant, it is the offensive, right? And I've seen this many times where trainers have miscalculated and the dog just gets so much worse because they're like, hey, like, I just got somebody backing me up all the freaking time. I never have to deal with anything, right? So in large part, it can actually make it worse. Next question.
Okay. Tyler, you had a question about dogs' fear compensating, like taking over when the owner has lack of control. Like, and I've seen this a lot. A reactive dog that is really just fearful because the owner's not taking any, doesn't read the signs and all that stuff. So can you explain that one? Or Tyler, if you have any clarifying questions, go for it.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I felt about the response that you just gave. When a dog is fearful and it's looking back to the owner, and you can see that it's fearful, it can go two ways. The dog can either cower in a corner or under a chair or a desk or between the legs of the owner, or it's going to react. And so that's not necessarily aggression or like it wants to kill anything. It's just reacting because of the fear, and it feels like, okay, you don't have control of this situation, so I'm going to take control and I'll step up. And so I've seen that a lot, and I feel like that's something that wasn't really touched on.
Okay, so I, in large part, disagree, and I'll tell you the reason why. The vast majority of dogs who are leash reactive, they are not concerned about another dog. If anything, if you let them off of the leash, they would run as fast as they could towards that other dog, which indicates they are not fearful of that other dog. And of course, a lot of people would say, yeah, but the dog has figured out his best defense is a good offense. No, when you're actually scared, the way that you behave is you avoid conflict. So I don't believe that the vast majority of dogs who are reactive on the leash, and this is just my opinion, I could be wrong, right? I'm not going to say that I'm right, but I just personally don't believe it, because if you're that scared, why would you draw so much attention to yourself? Like, why would I get out of the car in Detroit and start yelling at everybody, drawing attention to myself? If I'm that scared, I'm going to shut my face, I'm going to look at the ground, and I'm going to avoid conflict. So I just don't believe it, because the most of the time, the reactive dogs that I'm working with, all that they want to do is bark at that other dog. There are extenuating circumstances and get their energy out, right? So it's a frustration piece. There are extenuating circumstances where a dog has been attacked by another dog. They are clearly fearful that the owner did not advocate for them, as you mentioned. There are cases like this, and you may be seeing them more frequently than I am, right? This is just like a law of averages, right? But that, to me, is very, very uncommon. And as I said earlier, there are some dogs that have been attacked by other dogs, and I do not just automatically assume that that dog is going to be fearful because he's attacked, because I've seen many dogs over the years, not super common, but I have seen it, where those dogs enjoyed that fight and it brought out something inside of them because they got to a super high level of dopamine, which we'll talk about next week, right? And so in so doing, I just don't believe that most reactive dogs are reacted because their owners aren't doing anything or whatever. Where I see this more often, to your point, is I see it more often where there's a really sketchy dog, like, you know, we see a lot of German Shepherds, sketchy genetics. And there's a person that's walking down the street and the dog gets a little bit growly and sketchy. And then the owner is like petting the dog. It's okay, Roger. It's okay. It's all right. It's just, you know, Tyler from across the street. It's okay. Doing that whole pet, what you pet is what you get, convincing the dog that their behavior is actually something that they want, right? So, but again, just to reiterate, and maybe it's just something that I'm seeing, in most cases, the dog is choosing to draw attention to itself. And it's not because they don't trust their owner. Regardless of what they would do, they're going to act that way. And a simple little benchmark to kind of look at here is that, like, think of it like this. If you take the leash from the owner and you tell the owner to go sit in their car and you take the dog for a leash, if that dog still reacts towards other dogs, it's not the person and it's not fear. Okay. It's just because the dog wants to behave that way. If there's a huge break in relationship, right, the dog should behave differently with you, but they don't trust their owner. So this is something that I'll do from time to time, just to be able to see, like, okay, I just want to see what this dog is like with me. Okay. And 9 times out of 10, that dog is as squirrely with me as it is with the owners. So I don't know if that helps, but it's just the way that I see things. We might see things a little bit differently, but again, you may see more dogs that are concerned about other dogs, and that does happen.
Can I add to that though? Okay, so I like the story that you told because it's kind of playing into that, where your dad pulls into the parking lot and he asserts himself. He says, okay, keep your head down, don't make eye contact. I've got this. I'm in control.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where I try to work with people to get them into that mentality.
Totally.
So that their dog doesn't feel like they need to step up. And even if I take a leash from a client, the dog is already in that mentality, and the dog's obviously in the mentality of, all I have is my mouth and my vocal. I can get loud. I can bite. They don't have the ability to have a communication with that other dog. They just are already in that mindset.
Right.
But again, it just seems to me like a lot of times that is what the case tends to be. And once I do work with the dog, the client's like, oh, I've never seen him do that before. He's never acted like that. It's amazing, you know. And it's not necessarily anything that I'm doing differently. It's just that I'm not them.
But the thing is that you are doing something differently, right? Like, you're the trainer, you're the professional, which means they don't know what they're doing and you know what you're doing. So you are doing something differently, right? So you're not just taking a leash and doing nothing. You're doing something. You're marking behaviors, you're correcting behaviors, or however you're going along with things. So the dog is going to respond differently to you than it's going to be responding to them. So, like, in a perfect world, I would absolutely love for every dog to trust their owner in every context, right? Like, that would be amazing. Like, I wouldn't have a job, but like, that would be incredible. But the problem is that we don't live in that kind of a world, right? And I don't think that it's for lack of, like, you know, I just don't think that it's like a fearful thing. I think that dogs react because, in large part, the owner is not calling their dog out on the crap, right? It's not like, oh, this dog is so fearful because the owner is sitting there looking at their phone and he thinks that he just has to protect himself because there's just no other options. That does happen. But the lion's share of the cases, the owner is kind of off in their own little world. They don't have any timing. They're not using the right tools, etc. And the dog is just so jacked up and frustrated, and the owner is not doing anything about it. And so, to me, that's a frustration piece, which again fits more in the offensive kind of sphere in most cases. Does that help? Okay, perfect. And if you have more questions on that, feel free, like, you know, send me an email. Like, love to chat with you on it, right? Because, hey, this is just my opinion. It doesn't mean that it's right. You know, it's just what I've come across. Like, I'm fully well, like, hey, somebody could prove me wrong. Great. I'd love to learn, right? So love to have conversations like this. Sarah, you have another question?
Yes. Lisa asks, do you always do in-person consultations before you start training and have the owner do the collar test, put the collar on test before you do, before you quote them even?
Yeah, so the way I do my evaluations, you can look in the course and you can see some evaluations. But yeah, it's like I sit them down, I ask them what's going on, ask them some questions. I already have it, printed out because they filled it out on my website. I kind of go through some of the basics, some of the basic methodology, start going through e-collar. I'll get them to put the e-collar on, do a little bit of training with the dog, and then I'll give them a quote. So
I think she was asking if you do that for every client who reaches out to you, because the majority of people that reach out to you are a little more sketchy because you're known as the reactivity aggression guy. So
yeah,
I'm assuming that
I like to meet.
You're not going to give them a quote over the phone or on a Zoom consultation. You're going to meet them in person.
I'll give them, like, my website has prices on it so they can get a ballpark, but I'll if somebody calls me, I'll give them a ballpark, but like it's usually a pretty wide ballpark. Like it's usually at least $1,000 to $2,000 ballpark, depending on what I see. So difference. So yeah, that's just my way. I always do evaluations. I would never take money from somebody without meeting them. I would not do it. I know people that do it, and it sometimes doesn't go so well. So personally, I always do. Yeah, hope that helps. Next question.
Sorry, my light just went all, there we go. Okay. All right. Camila had a follow-up question, I think. How do you build client confidence without the muzzle? She wants to know what you do to build your client's confidence if you're not using muzzles on a regular basis, except for owner aggressive dogs.
I think the best thing that you can do to build confidence is show the clients that the training works. Like, I'm not the kind of trainer that's going to take like a month or 2 months to like actually start putting the dog in a compromising situation. If I'm dealing with a dangerous dog, I'm going to let that dog know pretty early in its relationship with me that like that crap does not fly. So, when you see somebody come in, like when I do it, like every evaluation I do, you might be the same, Camellia. Every evaluation I do, I put an e-collar on them, or the client puts an e-collar on them, and I work every dog that comes in, right? And most of my clients' dogs, probably 80–90% of them, are leash reactive. So I put an e-collar on them. I do like 2–3 minutes of like foundation, and then I bring one of my dogs in and use that as a distraction. Okay, so basically the idea is if I can get that dog under control within like a couple of seconds, the clients are like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like my trainer that I worked with for the last 6 months was like trying to get my dog to calm down around other dogs. And like you did that in like 2 minutes. Like this is insane, right? So it's good for sales because they know that like I know what I'm doing. And it tends to build confidence to say like, okay, if I could do that in 2 minutes, like imagine what we could do like if we actually had a whole program. So for me, part of the evaluation is like showing people that like the stuff works. Now you might have a follow-on question, which is like, what about if you want to do socialization and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And, right. So, that would be a little bit more intricate, right? Use a fence. Like that's the best way to do it. Like, and you don't have to force people to do socialization either. Like, for so many years, like every one of my clients, I wanted to be a full rehab. You should be able to go to the dog park and whatever. And I just stopped. I just don't force my clients to do that stuff. Like, you're gonna give people brain aneurysms if you do that long enough. Like people get so stressed out, even though their dog might be doing amazing, right? Like, and let's just be honest. The average person that says, I want my dog, like my dog is aggressive, like I want my dog to be like a social butterfly. The average person really doesn't want that when they understand how much time it actually takes. So a lot of what I do is I make those dogs safe. I make them controlled, right? Like my main program that I sell is called the Safe and Obedient Dog Program, right? It's not called the Social Dog Program. It's like cut the crap, stop behaving that way, be attentive, have a perfect recall, walk nicely on a leash, whatever. And so that helps when you can like show people the dog is like better controlled, you know? I don't know. And like I said, don't be afraid to use a muzzle. If you think that it's going to be helpful to you, go nuts. And like, if I really had to do like, you know, a tough dog and had to do a lot of socialization, yeah, I probably would do it too. You know what I mean? Or like if there's a kid involved or something like that. So, but for me, like, I'm just okay with putting enough pressure on a dog to get that dog to change and start making better decisions on its own. And I find that's really advantageous, because if you can get a dog to change, it tends to build confidence in the client to go like, well, I can do that too. All he did was like, just did this with the e-collar and the dog did a lot better. You know what I mean? So if they can see themselves doing it, then that tends to build confidence. Does that help?
Okay. Lauren had a question. Why do you let dogs try to remove the muzzle?
Because I would rather know if they can take the muzzle off than try to get them to keep it on. Like, I know a lot of trainers be like, use a lead, like a slip lead or something, and they're kind of like up with the leash and like, no, stop, and all this kind of stuff. If you stop the dog in the short term, and then he runs over the corner and rips it off and comes flying at you, like, right? Like, or at one of your dogs or something, I'd much rather know that he can get it off in the first 10, 20, 30 seconds. So that's why.
Peter, he wants to know how to sync the frequency of the e-collar setup, but we kind of addressed that in the chat and told him to go watch some YouTube videos.
It's super easy. Like, you just literally hold down your button, or if you have a smaller receiver.
Yep, sync it just like any other one.
Yeah, you just hold down the button until it starts blinking, and then on the Easy 900, you press on-off button, and that one at the same time. So on-off and the black S button.
You're showing the Boss collar. So that might be a slightly different.
Yeah, if you're using a smaller one, you just connect the magnets until it starts blinking. Next question.
Okay. Tyler, wolf hybrids. He had a question about working with wolf hybrids.
Okay, what's your question?
Do you do that? And what are some quirks that might be involved in that?
Well, I know they're similar to Shepherd, but I am working currently with a wolf hybrid, and I've already been bit. It's one of the reasons why I signed up for this course to be better informed. I got into a situation where there was two dogs. They were perfectly fine, and then whether it was a toy or whatever it was, they kind of started growling, and it escalated. I got a hold of the wolf hybrid's collar, and it didn't like that very much at all, so it got a hold of my arm. So obviously now I know a muzzle is a very good idea. But I don't know how much you've worked with wolf hybrids in the past, or if there's anything in particular that's different with them as opposed to a Shepherd or Malamute or that kind of thing.
I don't think they're that different. Like, some people are like, oh, they're like wolves, they're like a different species, and like technically they're a different species. But let's just be honest, most wolf hybrids are not really wolf hybrids. Like they don't have that much wolf in them, right? Some of them are just husky mixes. And the one that you're talking about may be an actual wolf hybrid. Usually they're mixed with German Shepherds.
I'd say it's probably maybe an 8.
Okay, so it's like, treat it like it's a husky, right? It's just an asshole. Like, so, you know, like, we can talk about this at length. Like, if you're willing to wait a little while, or you could always, like, you know, like, write down my phone number and call me, you know, and we could discuss it a little bit more. But like, the first question I would ask is like, okay, like, what's the foundation that you've done? What tools are you using? Like, if you went and grabbed the dog, like, were you doing any e-collar with the dog, or how are you going about, like, what were you going to do if something bad happened? Was the plan always to like grab the dog and stop it, or did you have another potential process that you could do?
No, I'm currently not using an e-collar with him yet.
Okay.
The plan was basically I will use a slip in order to have control, but at this point that was not on.
Okay.
And again, the dogs were interacting well. They were getting along
Yeah.
fine. And then it got to that side eye,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, I didn't recognize that. And then there was a little bit of vocalization. Well, neither one of them wanted to back down. So that's when I kind of did, that number to push them both apart, and
Mhm.
it got hold of me. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So
a
when
muzzle
you're,
is going to be in the future, possibly a prong collar, e-collar. I have those tools.
yeah, I would highly suggest an e-collar where you don't have to put your hands in there, which is the really handy thing. Like again, like I'm not such an amazing trainer that I'm capable of not having to break up fights because I'm just that good at reading other dogs, right? Like I'm able to prevent a lot of fights, right? And so it's it's not like another dog has never taken a shot at my dog or try to bite me or something like that. Like these things do happen, right? Like we all make mistakes, right? And so I just prefer e-collar because it's non-emotional. You can step in really 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 easily. Like we had a dog we were doing some social stuff with today at the fence, and he was being a real ass. And it was just like e-collar, he calmed right down. But like given if I had to have a leash on him or whatever, he could have redirected on me and stuff like that. So you probably want to upgrade, try to get an e-collar on him, and it'll just make things a lot safer for everybody involved. It depends on
Tyler,
the
use
fight.
use that Furminator.
Yeah,
Is
use
there
that
any-
Furminator. You might want to get some wings.
So my only problem with e-collar is you've got to have it in your hand, and you have to be anticipating that there's going to be an issue. Otherwise, you're checking your pockets or whatever, and you're trying to find it. And by that time, it's too late. They're already engaged.
Right, but you could say the same thing about anything, right? You could say the same thing about what if you have your hands in your pockets and a fight breaks out? You have to take your hands out of your pockets, right? So, like, I always try to remind trainers that, like, when you're training dogs, you always want leverage, right? More tools, better, right? Like, I don't use a ton of tools necessarily, but typically like a leash, like, if it was me, I would have had a long line on the dog. I would have started in the fence. I might not have seen anything bad at the fence potentially, but if I wanted to socialize, I would have had a long line on the dog and I would have had an e-collar. So if a fight did happen, I could let the fight continue, because a lot of fights, as you'll learn more as the weeks go on, a lot of fights are not fights, they're arguments. And if you give them 15 to 20 seconds, a lot of them just stop, right? Especially with those, a lot of the northern breeds, right? They go up on their hind legs and like, they're gnashing their teeth and all this kind of stuff. A lot of times you give those 15, 20 seconds and they just stop, right? They're just working stuff out. And I'm not a fan of letting dogs work things out, but I wouldn't be putting my hands in there. I would at least give it a little bit of time, see if I can redirect them, get them to come back, if I have a long line on, something like that, and try to not put my hands in there right away. Because remember the old adage, like dogs aren't going to kill each other in 15 seconds unless it's, a Mastiff and a Chihuahua, right? So I wouldn't be too worried about that, because remember, everything that you do has to be replicated by your client. And if your client is a 95-pound female, or male for that matter, or any gender or sex or whatever, the average person is not going to be able to go there and do it safe. We know that because you weren't able to do it safe, right? So this is my kind of quandary.
Yeah, right. Nor would I ever suggest such a thing.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so if you're going to do something, you want to make it so that if the client is going to replicate it, they can do it safely. And e-collar is the best way. And so, yeah, if you miss something, nobody's perfect, but at least you can just go, okay, e-collar, turn it all the way up. We're not doing that, and we're done. You don't have to stop it before it starts. You can stop it if you miss something later on. All right, next question.
All right. Annalisa, she had to go early, but she just wanted information on how to send before and after videos. Do you want them to upload to YouTube? Or do you have another?
Yeah, they can, preferably upload it to YouTube, make it an unlisted link if you don't want other people to see it. And then it won't come up in your normal YouTube feed. You can send me the link directly to mangodogshalifax@gmail.com. I'll be talking more about that as the weeks progress. And by the way, I prefer to see 3 different dogs in 3 different videos, you describing what you're doing, show a bit of before, during, and after, so I can kind of see what you're doing. I don't expect you guys to do things exactly the way that I do. I don't care. It's up to you guys. You know, I'm not trying to create cookie cutter trainers here, but I want to see, you know, what you guys are doing so I can get an idea of what's going on, and preferably not dogs that you've done in the past, preferably dogs that you've learned some stuff through the course and you put some dogs through and are using some new techniques, preferably. And then we also have the test that I'll be posting in the course over the next couple of weeks as well. Next question.
Okay. I think I'm going to take executive action here. Peter's question is pretty, I think it needs to be unmuted and detailed. So I'm wondering if we need to leave his for last. Peter, is that okay? I have 2 more questions ahead of you.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't even need to ask if there's not a lot of time. Trust
Yeah,
me.
you're fine.
Wait, okay.
Okay, let's do this. So Shane had 2 separate questions. One was, what if you have a dog that's basically in the back of his crate and then is fearful, biting, reactive like that? How would you handle that situation? And then his other question was, how do you work with dogs that have no motivation whatsoever?
First of all, there should be a video. I believe there's a video in there that talks about falconry food training. So go and watch that. That is basically using food as a resource. You can use that with every dog. Some dogs will lose a little bit of weight because they're not super motivated, but every dog has to eat. And so you can use that with every dog. Some dogs don't really care about praise and affection and stuff very much. But you can use it with every dog. It's great for crate training. So dogs that are fearful and whatever, if they start seeing you as the food source, you know, I had a ton of those dogs over the years when I was doing board and trains, you know, and they're just terrified and scared of everything. And well, I would say a ton, like most of them are just like jerks. But you know, there was definitely some of those dogs. You can watch specifically the videos in the video series, the aggression series. He's not friendly. There's a pit bull in there named Lexi that was very much like that, very fearful, and had bitten a couple of people, including a couple of people in the face, I believe. It was a long time ago, but the dog had definitely bitten people and was like, hey, if you pushed her, she would bite you. Kind of dog that was just super anxious, bad genetics, all that kind of stuff. So using food as a resource would be very, very key. That will help you in the crate. But in the meantime, you might decide, okay, well, this dog has to come out. He hasn't built enough food drive yet. You know, if you really got to get the dog out, you know, you can use one of these. You can put a slip lead on the end of it, and you can put it inside of the crate, slip it over the dog. You can also attach a leash, a long line to the end of the slip lead, so you don't have to go digging in for the slip lead, and put a slip lead on the dog that way. If you're really scared about the dog coming out and biting you, which most dogs won't, but some dogs will, you could put a place board in front of you. You could put, you know, something to block as you're bringing the dog out, whatever you need to do. But opening the crate, putting your third hand in there with a slip lead on the end of it, putting it over and doing it that way in a pinch before you build food drive is the way I would do it. Next question.
Peter, you're it. Last one, unless somebody else has any other questions. Justine might have a question about what do you carry around town to protect yourself? But Peter, go ahead.
Okay. So one of my newest clients, we've been working together for a couple weeks. You know, I don't mean for this to sound rude, but you know, very, 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 very wealthy family, and you know, they adopted. I don't know if they're from breeders. They must be, but two husky litter mates that, I mean, it was just like totally like, what were you thinking? And so it's just out of control, you know, and a lot of the things we're working on, we've already, you know, made a lot of progress in a couple weeks. Like the two dogs are, you know, backing out of their collars, bolting. They live on conservation land, so they would see a deer and just take off. So they've got excellent recall. They've got an excellent foundation already in a couple weeks. And you know, we haven't done yet, you know, the husky likes to dig out of the backyard fence and escape. So we haven't done anything to address that yet, but we're going to be. But the biggest issue that I'm struggling with is, you know, the male and female. The female used to pee when you try to put a collar on. She doesn't do that anymore, but she's still peeing in the crate when you, like, they're both crated downstairs in the kitchen, and the family sleeps upstairs. And when they come down in the morning, you know, literally when they get out of the bed, it's before they even come out of their room, the dogs are, you know, just like going nuts. And so the female will just pee everywhere. I don't think it's when you approach, but when you open the crate, the dog will just pee everywhere, you know, whether you put a leash on or not, whether you scatter food outside the door or not, you know, whether you bonk the crates in the morning or not. Like, it's just, I think part of it is the male is getting the female way too excited. Like, the male is very excited, you know, in the crate, and I think it's making the female lose it easy. You know, I don't know if separating them is the best thing to do. That's another thing. I don't know if litter mate syndrome exists. I've heard it does, but you know, someone please correct me, but they can't handle being away from each other. They cannot handle being away from each other. So we're about at the point where we're going to be working them together, but we also are going to be spending a lot of time on working them apart so that they can begin to handle that. You know, so anyway, I'll shut up now, but do you have any advice?
Yeah, no, good question. The first thing I would say is yes, litter mate syndrome is a thing. It's not like every person that gets two dogs is going to have it, like some trainers make it out to be, but some dogs are very, very trying when there's multiple dogs from the same litter. The first thing I would do is, if they have to be crated in the same room, they might have a big house where you could separate them and see how that goes. But if they have to be together, put both crates next to each other and put a piece of cardboard in between them so they can't see each other. She could be excitable peeing, or she could be stress peeing. I don't know, because I'm not there. It sounds like it's just excitability from what you're telling me. You know, obviously, you know, I'm sure you've already done this, but try to get the people to not get the dog aroused. I like to put the crates very close to the door, so the dog's not piddling all over the place when it's going outside. You should also tell your clients to put their jacket and coats in their bedroom, so they're already ready to go out the door before they take the dog out of the crate. Okay. They don't necessarily have to take them both out at the same time. They might want to just start with one and see which one goes better. And so it has to be very calm. They should not talk to the dogs. They should not look at the dogs. They should not do anything. If they can have it near the door, they've already dressed, they approach the crate, they open it, they open the door, the dog goes out instantaneously. If they do that for a couple of weeks, it should help considerably. In most cases, it definitely does. You know, like I said, have some cardboard in between them. Working the dogs separately together is going to be really helpful and advantageous for the dogs over the long term, because dogs like that tend to become very, let's say, dependent on each other. So giving them that separation is going to be key, as you're already starting to do. But yeah, like I said, like, have the clients be ready to go out, just like a puppy, right? Like Like,
Yep.
be ready to go out. Don't like go get the puppy all riled up and then like, oh, I got to get a couple coffee and I got to put my shoes on my jacket. Like, you know, my puppy that I got recently is like, the second I approach that crate, he's out the door within seconds, right? I'm ready to go out. I'm not putting my shoes on. It's all like we're going outside automatically because he just couldn't really hold his pee very long when he was young. So I would be doing some stuff like that. I think that would be helpful. There might be some other things that you could be
I
doing as
didn't,
well.
no, thank you so much, Ted. I left out that, you know, they admitted that they were, you know, insanely inconsistent with the potty training, and the dogs also poo and pee in the house, you know, whenever. And I was talking to them about, okay, like, so is this human error, you know, or are they marking their territory? You know, like, I really do think they need to just go back to, you know, crate training these dogs and being really strict and getting them on routine, predictability. You know, it's gonna suck. Like I said to them, you know, if they're allowed to free roam, he's gonna have an accident. He's gonna have an accident. So
How old are they?
they're 9 months. They're 9 months. So
Yeah.
they're pretty wild.
Yeah.
Oh, heck
so-
no, they should be potty trained by now. Oh, I am pissed by owners like this.
No, I know. I mean, I'm super pumped to work with them. You know, it's great. You know, I'm learning a lot. But yeah, I just think they're gonna struggle with that, and I've already expressed that. You know, but I don't think they're gonna be cool with creating their dogs. You know, as much as, you know, it would have to be a lot of pretty much incredible structure. You know.
So one of the things that might be helpful is that like I very rarely force my clients to do anything.
Yeah.
There's often an element where I allow my language, not often, but sometimes there's an element where I allow my clients to languish, which just means I let them do the wrong thing and suffer the consequences and know that I'll be there to give them advice when they're finally ready to like own up to what they're doing is incorrect, right?
Yeah.
And it may be that it's not until they're a year or 2 years old where they're like, I'm so tired of picking up poop inside the house and cleaning up pee that like I need to take this crate training more seriously. You could have them tether the dogs. That's also helpful. You know, I think there's also an element too where it's like, you know, with my puppy, it's like 99.9% of what I did with him is letting him out, praising him when he used the bathroom outside and so on. But there was, you know, a period of time where he was kind of like, just got lazy and is just like, well, I'm just gonna use the bathroom. Like, I want to do this. I did it, you know, when I was a puppy and I don't want to go outside. Like, I'm just gonna pee here. And so I corrected him for it. Nothing super stern or anything, but like, you know, he's a relatively soft dog in a lot of ways. So, you know, I just like, no. And then I grab his collar and I put him outside. And that was enough to do it. You know, if I needed to, I would use an e-collar if I had to. If the dog knows the difference between right and wrong, then you can start to use a bit of correction there too. But one thing that might be helpful is you might give them an ultimatum. You might say, okay, here's your two options. You can do the crate process and tethering, or you can do the correction process. It's up to you, right? So this is very, very smart in the sense that you want to give people options, and you want to try to give them options where every option that you give them, the dogs get better. Okay. And so it's not always just about like, here's what you have to do. If you can come up with 2 or 3 different things and say, you guys sit down as a family and decide what you want to do, they can decide what's going to be best for them. And they might decide they want to do the crate training thing, and it might work like 90% of the time. And then you might shift on later on where they're like, wow, it's like so much better, but still every once in a while, they'll use a bathroom inside the house. Okay, so we know that the crate stuff worked really well, just giving them a consistent thing to follow. But now we need to shift to a little bit of correction, right? But you know, this is something that I'll do. Like, I don't like to use mind games with my clients, but sometimes it can be helpful. Like, I've had clients before that say, hey, I have older parents that live downstairs, and when they come upstairs to like say hi, you know, to hang out with us, they get the dog so excited and they get them to jump up and all this kind of stuff. And I go, okay, that's cool. So your two options are you can either live with that if you don't want to address it. I'm not going to judge you. It's totally up to you. Or you can tell your parents that you just paid thousands of dollars to train your dogs. And every time they come up, they've been instructed by the dog trainer to correct their dogs for jumping on you. So the parents are in the driver's seat. And most of the grandparents don't want to see the dogs being corrected. So they tone down their behaviors and the dogs get a lot better, right? So you can use different, family relations and stuff depending on how things go. Sometimes you got to be a little bit creative to get people on board. But again, and sometimes it's just like, and if you don't want to address this, that's okay. Like, I'm not going to force you. It's not like your dog is like biting your kid in the face every day and we have to address it. Like, some people are okay with cleaning up piss and shit for 2 or 3 years. And they finally get to the point where they're like, I've bought like 15 rugs and I just don't want to deal with this anymore. And you might need to let them languish. So you can kind of see, and there's a good way to start like differentiating where people are at in the training, right? I'll ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you at the peeing in the house from 1 to 10? If they say anything less than a 7 or an 8, they're not really that serious. So you might just be like, okay, so if you want to address it, I'll give you some options to be able to address it. And like, honestly, sometimes people just, they don't really care. Like, it's not that big of a deal to them, right? And so I'll just be like, okay, so like, if it's not that big of a deal to you, that's cool. Like, if it becomes a big deal in the future and you want help with it, just let me know and I'll help you through it. But like, you want to try to gauge like how serious people are about it. Because to me, it would be infuriating if I had a 9-month-old dog or 2 of them that were using the bathroom in the house. But that doesn't mean that everybody's infuriated by that. It might just be like a small blip on the radar for them. They might care about other things and just like, this is a minor inconvenience for us. You don't know until you ask them, right?
Thanks, Ted.
I forgot Daniel's question. It got hidden in the comments. Yeah, now he's running.
Sorry,
Daniel asked, how do you determine whether you're using a prong or not?
So I did touch on it a little bit, but just to go through it again, because I use e-collars on essentially all of my clients, I don't use prongs very often. I'll use them on multiple dog homes just because it's easier because the clients don't have to have a remote. I will also use them on very large, strong dogs that have a history of pulling their owners around, because it is better to have both a prong and an e-collar on one of those dogs. Because if you think about it, kind of to Tyler's point, you have to have a remote and you have to be ready, right? So dogs tend to be a little bit more pulley if you do it with e-collar, because the client may put it in their pocket or have it around their neck and be a little bit more inconsistent and let the dog get away with a little bit of pulling. However, it's a little bit different with the prong because prong is self-correcting, right? You can also add a correction, but it's also self-correcting. So if I'm dealing with a really strong dog that has a history of pulling their owners around, I'll typically use both because we're going to use this for off leash and stuff anyways. Or sometimes I'll just use a prong. But in most cases, I don't use it just because, I don't know. I find some people are a little bit touchy about prong collars, and that's fine. Like, if, in most cases, I don't need to use it. But like I said, if it's multiple dogs, it's just so much easier for the clients. They don't have to be going up and down in the levels. Like, Rover is at, usually is at 18 and the other dog is usually at a 30 and going back and forth. Plus they have 2 leashes plus a collar. It's just a lot more difficult to do with an e-collar. I can do it, but it's harder for the trainer to do in most cases.
Hey, Ted, I was wondering about the activation of a reactive dog with a prong collar compared to a slip leash collar. What would you prefer or recommend in that situation?
Explain that a little bit more. Like, what do you mean by activation?
Like,
I've been hearing that the prong collar would make the dog more spark in energy,
Okay.
to react more compared to a slip.
So traditionally, if I start with one tool and I don't think it's working as well as I had hoped, I'll go to a different tool. So if I use a prong, and sometimes I'll put a prong on a dog and it's just like, yeah, this is not going to be a great tool. They try to push right through it. They're so easily stimulated, so it can almost make some dogs worse. If you're really, really good with a prong collar, you can still work those dogs through it, but the average client's not going to have leash handling skills that are that good. And so, yeah, if I start on a prong and it's like, this is not like, I'll usually go to an e-collar. If the client doesn't want to do e-collar and it's just a leash training thing, you might want to switch to a gentle leader, a halty, transitional. That might be another good option too. But like, if the dog's really like, for example, if I set a dog up on an e-collar and I'm like, I did a video. Okay. Full transparency here. Okay. So
Sorry, I got like 2 minutes. I got 2 minutes and I got to run to work.
Okay.
So
all right. Okay.
I'll watch the recording if it goes longer.
No, it's okay. I'll make it really, really brief. Okay. There are some dogs that e-collars are not the best tool for when it comes to leash walking. So I'll usually go to a prong, and in most cases it will work. Let's say I hypothetically started the dog on a prong and it wasn't that great. Usually the e-collar will work. So in a lot of cases, e-collar is fine. If it's not, I'll go to a prong, right? If we're just doing a walk doctor, I'll start with a prong. If that's not going according to plan, then I'll go to an e-collar, etc. Right? So basically, whatever you start with, if it's not going, be creative, try other tools, see what works better. Usually you'll find that like dogs that are obstinate with one tool, if you switch up a couple of different times with different tools, you'll usually find something that'll work a little bit better. In most cases.
Thank you.
95% of the time, it's just like, oh, this dog is so fighting this prong collar. And usually it's dogs that have already had a prong collar on. It was really, improperly fit. The dog, just pulling them around, all that kind of stuff. Or really, really high drive like Shepherd or Pity or whatever, and it almost makes them worse. Usually e-collar is a better solution. If I try e-collar and that's not working well, then I'll go to maybe a slip or a transitional or something like that. But usually if you go through enough tools, you'll find something that will work better than the initial one that was not super helpful.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Yeah, good night. Thanks for joining. Do we have any more questions?
That was it, as far as I can see.
Okay.
3 hours, Ted.
That's nothing.
You better check your Zoom allowance.
Yeah.
You're like the Joe Rogan of dog training.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I wasn't
Jocko
expecting-
Willink here, going on for 5-6 hours.
Yeah, I think last year the first one was only like an hour and a half. So
So we're doing good.
I'm here for people. Like, and if people want to duck out, they can always watch the replay later if they want to. So I'll post the replay just for everybody. I'll post it tomorrow. I'll hopefully be uploading it tonight and get it on the course as soon as I can. If you want to watch it again, feel free. And we'll be back next week. We'll be talking about leash reactivity. So it'll be a good topic. And we'll go from there. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Sarah, for helping out with everything. I really appreciate things. It was
No
a great
problem.
call. And hopefully you guys learned something. If you have any questions throughout the week and you want to reach out to me, send me an email, give me a call, and we'll go from there.
All right. Good night.
Okay, so stop recording.